about your boyfriends and kissing girlfriends too. The prairie dogs don't mean anything. You talk about old lovers, all those men who fell for you. The prairie dogs don't mean anything. Remember how your mama said don't mention other boys. Remember how your daddy told you let's go make some noise. I said glory hallelujah Mary had a little lamb. Prairie dogs don't mean anything. It seems to me that someday you'll be glad of who I am, 'cause prairie dogs don't mean anything. Don't you see that someday you'll be wishing on a star? You and me as he and she, but don't let's go too far. Na 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 na. Prairie dogs don't mean anything. Na 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 na. Prairie dogs don't mean anything. Who's to say, but maybe when we've both gone old and gray, prairie dogs don't mean anything.
The meeting will come to order. We want to remind you that it's necessary to check with the attendants, as only authorized personnel are allowed to sit within the roped off area. And members should also have name tags so that we can make sure we know who's here and who the person next to you is. Checkers advise that we have 114 members present at this time. It's necessary to have 73 members for quorum, so we do have a quorum. The invocation will be done this morning by the Reverend Richard O'Donnell, pastor of St. Michael's Church and chaplain of the Brattleboro Fire Department and the Brattleboro Police Department.
Let us pray. Dear God and our Creator, we ask you to bless our meeting this morning, but most importantly, to bless our community. May it always be free from harm, and may we know of goodness between people and homes. And always may your blessings be abundant to us, and may peace be within our community today and always. We ask this in faith. Amen.
We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Boy Scout troop that is here is Boy Scout Troop 405, consisting of Nelson Congasell, Gareth Roy, Slayton Pearl, and Clark Ham. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. The opening and closing paragraphs of the warning of today's meeting will be read by the Town Clerk, Annette Cappy.
Good morning. The legal voters qualified to vote in representative town meeting are hereby notified and warned to meet in the gymnasium of the Brattleboro Union High School on Saturday, the 24th day of March, 2012 at 8:30 a.m. to act on 25 articles, and it was dated on February 1st, 2012, and signed by the Brattleboro Select Board, Richard DeGray, Christopher Chapman, Dora Baboulis, David Gartenstein, and Ken Schneck. Also by the Brattleboro Town School Directors, Margaret Atkinson, Mark Truhan, David Scholes, Jill Stahl-Tyler, and Peter Yost.
There are certain procedural rules with respect to the conduct of this meeting, and I just will read those to remind everyone what they are. Our voting procedure is that on any particular issue that you are requested to vote on, the options are, first of all, standing or raising your hand for those who might have difficulty standing, either for the article or against the article. That's the normal procedure. Secondly, by division of the town meeting members, which can be requested by any town meeting member if they feel that the decision of the chair is off, you can request that procedure, and the votes will actually be counted by the people standing for and those standing against. And the third option, which is a long procedure, which fortunately we've never had to do, is to have a roll call of all the members present. Now, a division requested shall be held in the discretion of the moderator or upon the demand of 3 or more of the members. A roll call shall be held upon the demand of 6 or more members. Now, concerning debate or even discussion, we would request that when you use the microphone, make sure you do have a microphone to use, and that you talk into the microphone clearly so that it can not only be heard by those watching on the public TV station, but also can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting as to who was speaking. Now, no town meeting member or voter of the town shall speak more than twice on the same question without leave of the town meeting members. Town meeting members or voters of the town who have spoken once shall not again be entitled to speak on the floor to the exclusion of another who has not spoken. The town meeting members may not call the question immediately after speaking on the particular issue. Special committees may be established by the town meeting members, and the town meeting members, upon the motion of a town meeting member, may resolve the meeting into a committee of the whole on any pending questions. Now, the meeting is being televised and broadcasted live by the BC TV Brattleboro Community Television channels 8 and 10. The meeting is further being interpreted for the deaf and handicapped and those of hard of hearing by Corey Bruner and Elizabeth B. Jerky. The best part of this announcement is the fact that morning refreshments are being provided by the Brattleboro Union High School Swiss Exchange Group, and you're welcome to leave and grab a quick cup of coffee and a muffin or whatever you can at any time. Now, the Finance Committee, I would like to have Mr. Agavi indicate where they are so that I can make sure if we can decide who's going to be on the committee or who's going to want to be on the committee so that decision can be made. So I'm going to ask Mr. Agavi if he'd be willing to make a report. Mr. Agavi. Now, I guess we don't have anybody running with the mics, is that right? Okay, the mics are on the floor. I'm sorry, I thought we had the usual procedure. Okay, Mr. Agavi.
Spoon Agavi, District 3, and Chair of the Town Finance Committee. You all have a report, and naturally you've read it. And we try, essentially one of our main tasks was to try to demystify town finances, so people could just read more of a narrative than a lot of numbers and try to get some sense of what we did. And as I've said before at the informational meeting, the focus was more on the financial health of the town than exactly how much and where every cent was spent. Because we did feel that the town and the select board did everything they possibly could to keep the budget as low as they could. So the amount of money spent was not itself an issue. It was a very enjoyable year on the Finance Committee. I would like to point out the members that work with me: Michael Bosworth, and John Wilmerding, and Bob Rottenberg. Is he in the house? I don't think so. He's out of town. And Tim Cuthbertson, who is, I think, also out of town. And Lisa Donahue, who was a major help but had to leave about two-thirds of the way through because of problems. So it was a wonderful year, and I hope you all enjoyed it reading this, and we hope to do a lot more next year, perhaps using pie charts and all kinds of things to make it look even easier to read and understand. And last but not least, a plea to anybody. We do have 4 or 5 very good people on the committee now. We could easily go with 6 or 7 or more. We'll be looking at economic sustainability. We'll be looking at policies. We'll be looking at taxes and lots of interesting things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think, Mr. Agavi, it's fair to say that the meeting this year is very pleased and accept the report that you and your committee put together. It was very informative, even had some suggestions, which are always controversial, but I think you really performed well for our town. And if you would let me know sometime, we will get the committee reformed for next year. Now, the chair recognizes Mr. DeGray for purposes of a preliminary motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the following persons be authorized to sit in the reserved sections with the Select Board and School Director: Town Manager Barbara Sontag, Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland, Town Attorney Robert Fisher, School Superintendent Ron Staley, and Business Administrator James Kane.
Is there a second to the motion? Motion has been made and seconded that the following persons be authorized to sit in the reserved section with the Select Board and school directors: Town Manager Barbara Sondag, Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland, Town Attorney Robert Fisher, School Superintendent Ron Staley, and Business Administrator James Kane. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor kindly rise or raise your hand. You may be seated. Those opposed, kindly rise or raise your hand. And the ayes have it, and you've adopted the preliminary motion. The Chair recognizes Ms. Baboulas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the electronic media be permitted to remain in the reserved section.
Is there a second? Motion is made and seconded that the electronic media be permitted to remain in the reserved section. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor kindly rise and remain standing until counted, or raise your hand. You may be seated. Those opposed, kindly rise and remain standing until counted. And the ayes have it, and the electronic media is permitted to remain in the reserved section. Chair recognizes Ms. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is my honor today to read a resolution that was presented and passed in the House of Representatives yesterday, concerning honoring former Senator Robert Gannett, member of this body, on the occasion of his 95th birthday. And I'd like to read the resolution and just say a couple of other words. And this was presented by all members of the Senate and all members of the House. Whereas Robert Bob Gannett's presence graced the General Assembly during his 4 terms in the House of Representatives as the member from Brattleboro, 1953 to 1960, and later for 10 terms as the senator from Windham County, 1973 to 1992. And whereas, when the newly elected Representative Bob Gannett arrived in Montpelier in January 1953, his legal expertise as a respected attorney was acknowledged with his assignment to the Committee on Judiciary. And whereas in 1955, Representative Bob Gannett was appointed to the Committee on Appropriations, and his rapid mastery of budgetary minutiae was a prelude to his service as committee chair during the 1957 and 1959 biennia. And whereas, a keen observer of the parliamentary process, in 1957, he served as Speaker pro tempore while presiding over the House's deliberations. And whereas, near the close of the 1960 adjourned session, Representative Bob Gannett's final year in the House of Representatives, his colleagues voted him President of the House of 1959, an organization the members formed for the purpose of holding reunions. And whereas in 1972, the voters of Windham County elected Robert Gannett as their new senator, and he became one of the Senate's most esteemed members. And whereas in his initial senatorial biennium, Senator Bob Gannett sat on the Finance, General and Military, and Highway Traffic Committees. And whereas in 1975, he resumed his role as a legislative budget scrutinizer with his appointment as Vice Chair of the Committee on Appropriations. And he subsequently earned the rare distinction of chairing this all-important committee in both the House and the Senate. And whereas the Committee on General and Military Affairs also benefited from his astute leadership as Vice Chair and Chair, and while serving as Chair of the Committee on Institutions, Senator Bob Gannett was a strong advocate, as was his late wife, Sarah Aldy Derby Gannett, of state financial assistance for the establishment of a permanent corridor for the Long Trail, helping to create a legacy that will endure for generations to come. And whereas during his senatorial career, his committee assignments also included Senate Government Operations, Senate Transportation, and Joint Fiscal, and his wise parliamentary counsel proved invaluable on both the committees on Senate rules and joint rules. And whereas on the morning of Sunday, April 26, 1992, Senator Bob Gannett concluded his long and illustrious legislative service when he offered the final motion of the 1992 adjourned session, directing that the President of the Senate appoint a committee to inform the Governor that the Senate was ready to adjourn, sine die. And whereas his wealth of common sense, wise judgment, and concern for the well-being of Vermonters was always drawn upon in his decision-making process, and his service in the General Assembly as an attorney and in the community at large epitomized the work of a genuine statesman. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the General Assembly honors former Representative and Senator Robert T. Gannett on his 95th birthday and extends to him best wishes on this special occasion. Now, I'd just like to add something to this. When the draft of the resolution, in doing research, apparently did not know the other very important contribution that former senator made to this town, and that is in 1959 he sponsored an act in the House of Representatives that allowed the Brattleboro to establish representative town meeting. And I believe that we are still the only town in the state with that particular form of town meeting. So I was able to get up on the floor of the House of Representatives after the resolution was read to inform the members of this. And there were a couple of other people who got up and spoke, people who had known the former senator in their work, and one of them was Representative David Dean of Westminster, who spoke about Mr. Gannett's help with when one of the federal government removed funding for one of the community action agencies, and how important the senator was in recognizing the needs of the most vulnerable people, and made that able to continue. And then I'd also like to quote, if I may, from Representative Tom Koch of Berry City, who served with Mr. Gannett when he was a representative. And I think that his words really say so much. So I'm quoting Representative Koch. There are very few members of this House now who were privileged to serve with Bob Gannett. But those of us who had that privilege know him as the consummate Vermont gentleman. He had a comprehensive knowledge of the workings of Vermont government, and he was always willing to listen to those who had questions or suggestions regarding pending legislation, always in a nonpartisan manner. In my view, he sets the ideal of how those of us who work in this building ought to go about serving the people of Vermont. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. The senator is not with us this morning. Not that he didn't really want to not come, but he shared with me on the telephone a fact that when you resign or you leave and don't seek a term of office, you never go back to the meeting that's held after you've left office. You wait a year. And I said, Senator, we will do anything you want. And he said, you'll see me next year. However, member from District 2, Mr. Cummings, is going to read a further resolution that I think we ought to adopt, recognizing Mr. Gannett's involvement in this whole organization. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm from District 1,
Oh,
which is Mr.
well,
Gannett's district, and he indeed has informed me that he plans to attend next year's meeting. Although I urged him to come today, he gave all sorts of reasons, which you have enunciated very well this morning. He just won't show for the first meeting, but he will be here from now on. Whereas Robert T. Gannett, while serving as town representative of Brattleboro, sponsored an act entitled An Act to Authorize Representative Town Meetings in the Town of Brattleboro, which act permitted the town to divide the town into districts to permit citizens from each district to elect citizens as their town meeting representatives. And whereas this unique form of government in Brattleboro, with its built-in safeguards for all citizens, has served the town and town school district for 50 years. The first such meeting in Brattleboro was held on March 18, 1961, and Bob Gannett has been elected each year and has been an active participant in these annual meetings as a member, moderator pro temp, and chair of the Rules Committee until his retirement on March 6, 2012. Now, therefore, we, the town meeting representatives, on behalf of all of the citizens of Brattleboro, do hereby thank Bob Gannett for his founding of our unique form of government and his active participation in its operation for the past 50 years. And we further resolve good wishes and good luck to him on his 94th birthday, and that we all stand and sing happy birthday to him. Happy birthday.
You going to lead us in song, Mr. Cummings?
You don't want me to.
Okay.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. I wish to advise you folks that this week has been kind of difficult for me, as I've had some medical problems which are being taken care of by my physician. However, I find that I don't have the capacity to sometimes read because I can't see, or I get doubles, so I may read the same thing twice, or I just become very tentative on my feet, and therefore I've decided, in talking with the administration, that I am going to step down this morning and we will elect a moderator pro tem to serve today so that the business will be conducted in an expeditious way. There won't be any delays because I can't see when I'm going to supposedly be reading, and etc. I appreciate your understanding, and at this time I'm going to call upon the town attorney, Mr. Fisher, and have him tell us the procedure to elect a moderator pro tem. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. By the statute, when in the absence of the moderator, it is the select board member who opens a meeting, but that doesn't apply here because you've opened the meeting. But then once the meeting is called to order, the select board member presides until a moderator pro tem is chosen. So we need a nomination from the body to elect a moderator pro tem, and then that moderator will serve for this meeting today.
Thank you. Chair will recognize Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I nominate Lauren Crisp as moderator pro temp.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. Are there any other nominations? Yes, Mr. Wilberding.
I nominate Douglas Cox as moderator pro tem.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. Motion has been made and seconded for Douglas Cox. Are there any other nominations? Mr. Gavi.
I would like to nominate Marshall Wheelock.
Marshall Wheelock has been nominated. Are there any other? Is there a second? Any other nominations? Okay. Now, to make sure that we do justice to this, do you think we ought to have a paper ballot, or do you think we can do it by number?
Mr. Moderator, I think it's at your discretion. We can do it by standing vote if you're comfortable with that, or paper ballot.
Okay. Paper ballot. Okay. It seems people would like to do it by paper. I would have no objections. Pardon me? Yes.
Kathy Erford, District 1. Could we ask the nominated parties to maybe make a statement of their skill or interest before we vote?
If that's the will of the members, okay. Why don't we start with Mr. Crisp?
Mr. Moderator, I'm happy to serve if chosen to do so. I'm a lawyer here in Brattleboro. I've been practicing for the past 40 years, but I have also been a member of this body for at least 30 years and have observed your performance. I think I would be able to conduct the meeting. However, I must admit that I do not have your amazing ability to know everyone's name. My intent would be to recognize everyone, give everyone an opportunity to be heard on every issue. I will say that many years ago I did serve as Assistant Secretary of the Vermont Senate, where my job was the parliamentarian, and so I was responsible for many of the issues that we do face. Now, I must admit also that was quite a few years ago that I served in that capacity, and we did use Mason's Rules of Order instead of Robert's, but they're essentially the same.
Thank you. Mr. Cox.
Doug Cox, District 1. I don't have an accurate count, but I think I've been a member of this body for about 20 years, and would second what's been said about what I've been able to learn from this body about good procedure, good order. I'm not a lawyer. I have extensive experience running meetings and making sure that everyone is heard within bodies. Most of my experience has been within the Quaker process, which is quite different from Robert's Rules of Order. I was unaware that the meeting was needing a moderator pro tem today, so I do not feel especially prepared. I did look on my shelf this morning for my Robert's Rules and couldn't find it. But I am willing to serve if elected.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Wheelock.
Well, thank you very much for the honor of being nominated, and I hope you will all join me in making the difficult decision over which of the two previous speakers we should have for moderator today. Thank you.
So we now have two candidates, and let's take a vote on whether or not we should do this by ballot. If you want to do it by ballot, would you kindly rise, raise your hand, and stay standing until counted? You got some people. Okay. 6 votes. Those who would rather do it by a voice vote, kindly rise, remain standing, or raise your hand. Okay. Well, I think there's an issue as to whether or not we have, it's 6 people for a roll call. We were asking about the paper ballot as opposed to the voice ballot. And there's no rule as to what we do for paper ballots. Okay. It appears that the vote favors doing it by a voice vote. So we'll do the vote by a voice vote, and we'll take the candidates in accordance with the time they were nominated. So it'll be all in favor of Mr. Crisp. Kindly rise, remain standing until counted. Do you think? Okay. Those who would favor Mr. Cox, kindly rise, remain standing until counted. Okay. It appears to the chair, by the virtue of the number of people that stood in favor of each person, that Mr. Crisp has been elected as moderator pro tem. Any objections? Mr. Crisp, you can come up here, and I'm going to take your seat.
Well, Tim, I'm happy to do this for you. Please don't go too far, however. I certainly, I know we all wish you the best in terms of getting over this hopefully not too serious illness. As I said a few moments ago, Tim has an amazing ability to identify people by name. He knows everyone. and so I will apologize. I am nowhere near as talented on that score. However, I promise you that I will do my utmost best to give everyone an opportunity to be heard on any issue, to present any motion, or to ask any questions of the appropriate administrative official here. Let's get started then with Article 1. To act on the auditor's report, town and town school. The chair would recognize Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the auditor's report be accepted as printed.
Is there a second? The article has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the auditor's, accepting the auditor's report as printed, please rise or raise your hand to signify aye. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. The ayes have it, and Article number 1 has been approved. Article 2, to elect 3 trustees for the Brooks Memorial Library to serve 3 years and 2 trustees to fill the unexpired terms of 1 year. The chair would recognize Dr. Schneck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the following be elected to serve for 3 years on the Board of Trustees for the Brooks Memorial Library: Kenneth Vitale, Adam Franklin Lyons, and Thomas Murray, each for a 3-year term, and Pam Becker and Jane Southworth, each for a 1-year term.
There is a second? I didn't hear. Is there a second? Thank you. This is an election of individuals to serve as trustees of the Brooks Memorial Library. So therefore, I will ask, are there any other nominations? Hearing none, are you ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion as presented by Dr. Schenk, please signify by standing. You may be seated. And when I say standing, for those who, as Mr. O'Connor has already pointed out, are having difficulty standing, I will check for hands too. So if you prefer just to raise your hand, that will constitute a vote. All those opposed, please signify by standing. The article as presented is adopted, and you have elected Kenneth Vitale, Adam Franklin Lyons, and Thomas Murray to each serve for a 3-year term, and Pam Becker and Jane Southworth each for a 1-year term. Now moving to Article 3, to elect 2 representatives to the Capital Grant Review Board for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012. Chair would recognize Mr. Gartenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to elect Arden and Bob Fagelson to the Capital Grant Review Board for a term of 1 year from March 24, 2012.
The motion has been made and seconded to elect Robert Fagelson and Arden Fagelson to the Capital Grant Review Board for 1 year from March 24th, 2010. Is there discussion? Or better yet, are there other nominees? Hearing none, are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Robert Fagelson and Arden Fagelson, please signify by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed signify by rising. And you have approved the election of the three candidates. Moving now to, or the two candidates. Moving now to Article 4, to see if the town and town school district will authorize its select board and school directors to employ a certified public accountant or public accountants. Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town and town school directors authorize its select board and school directors to employ a certified public accountant for public accounts.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to that the town and town school district authorize its select board and school directors to employ a certified public accountant or public accountants signify by standing aye. You may be seated. All those opposed signify again by standing. And you have approved Article 4. Article 5. Point of order.
Pardon me, Mary Kane, District 2.
Yes,
I think you still need to say abstentions. Don't you have to say voting for, voting against, and abstentions?
Well, typically, historically, we have not done that. I have no problem if that's the case, but I'm going to immediately kick the can to Mr. O'Connor and see if he can provide me any advice on that. Is it necessary, Mr. O'Connor, to ask for extensions?
Abstentions.
Abstentions.
Yeah. Oh.
It's been my understanding that, I know this is to be true under Mason's rules, but even under Robert's rules, that if you're present, you have to vote one way or the other. There's no abstaining.
Thanks.
And that's kind of what we've done during my tenure.
Thanks, Mr. O'Connor. I appreciate that input because that has been our past practice. And unless there is other objection, I'd like to continue with that practice of just asking for either in favor or opposed. And unless anyone wishes to rise and make a specific note of their abstention. Okay, so let's move then to Article 5. To see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of a town and town school district clerk for a term of 1 year. Ms. Barboulis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the appointment of Annette Cappy as town and town school district clerk for a term of 1 year from March 24th to 2012 be ratified, approved, and confirmed.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Mr. Wheelock.
Commercial Wheelock District 2. I noticed in the handout we received today that our town charter, proposed charter, has been changed by the legislature to read in part, the town clerk and town treasurer shall be non-voting ex officio members if appointed by the town manager. And I would welcome any comments on how this affects our the status of our town clerk if in fact she is now appointed by the select board, which is, I believe, one of the items that was discussed when the proposed charter changes came up.
The administration, or maybe Mr. Fisher, is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In answer to that question, that legislation has not passed as of yet, so as of today, we are operating under our existing charter. There is a handout with respect to the status of the legislation approving the changes to the town charter that went through the House committee. I believe that next goes to the Senate committee and then to a vote of the entire House and Senate. And Mr. Moderator, the town manager would like to speak as well.
Okay. Yield to the town manager.
Thank you. I listened to the tape of the House committee and I can explain how that got put in. It actually doesn't change what happens here. As long as the clerk and the treasurer are appointed by the board, which they are, they will continue to be voting members. How it happened was, if you recall, if you were in 2010 when the charter changes came before, there were two changes that were proposed in two different areas. The first change was, the first one was who would be ex officio members. The second change that was in a later article was that the town clerk and the treasurer would become department heads and be hired by the town manager. The first article was taken up first, and Mr. Everett made a motion at that time to say, but if the second change passes, he didn't want them to be voting members. Okay, so he made a motion to add that specific language into the charter. The town meeting members then voted on the second phase, which was to make them department heads, and that got voted down. So Mr. Everett's initial motion actually became not necessary. However, when it was before the committee, the legal counsel serving on the committee had gone through all the motions that passed during your meeting and recognized that Mr. Everett's motion was not included in the updated or in the charter that was presented to the legislative committee. The committee then said, we'll put that in there because it was a motion that passed. After the town meeting voted in 2010, the town clerk and the town attorney got together and put all the changes into one document and sent it up. They didn't put that Everett motion in there because it wasn't necessary. However, then legal counsel up at the state saw that it was an approved motion and put it in there. We don't see that it changes anything at this point because they are still appointed by the select board. So it adds a little bit of confusion when you see that change. It actually doesn't impact anything, and it actually does make sense on why the committee put that in there. And actually, personally, I was way impressed by the legal counsel advising, how closely they paid attention, not just to what was submitted to them, but how they went back and referenced your representative town meeting, which you recall was 2 days. So kudos to our legislatures and their aides.
The question is, shall the town ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of Annette Cappy as Town and Town School District Clerk for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012. Is there further discussion? Please.
I always think I shouldn't ask a question, but this is Peter Yost from District 2. There may be others out there that are confused. What would happen if we didn't confirm, approve, and ratify the town select board's appointment of the town clerk?
The town attorney is further interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. If the appointment is not ratified, then it would have to go back to the select board for another appointment, and then we would need to have a special town meeting for the ratification of that appointment. So we would continue with the process set forth in the charter until a town clerk is appointed and ratified.
Okay. Further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of ratifying, approving, and confirming the Select Board's appointment of Annette Cappy as the Town and Town School District Clerk for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012, please signify by saying aye by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And you have approved Article 5. Article 6, to see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of a town and town school district treasurer for a term of 1 year. The chair would recognize Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of John O'Connor as Town and Town School District Treasurer for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor of ratifying, approving, and confirming the Select Board's appointment of John O'Connor as Town and Town School District Treasurer for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012, please indicate and signify by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed, please stand. And you have approved Article 6. Article 7, to see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of a town attorney for a term of 1 year. Dr. Schneck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of Fisher & Fisher as town attorney for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012.
Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the appointment of Fisher & Fisher as town attorney for a term of 1 year from March 24th, 2012, please indicate by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed, please indicate by rising. And you have once again approved the firm of Fisher & Fisher as the town attorney for a term of 1 year beginning March 24th of 2012. Moving then to Article 8, to see what salaries the town will pay its officers. the chair would recognize Mr. Gartenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the salaries of the Select Board be set at $2,000 each, that the salary of the chairperson be set at $3,000, and that the Select Board be authorized to fix the salaries of all other town officers for the 2012-2013 fiscal year.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Is there discussion? Mr. Everett.
Moderator, I move we amend to $4,000 per member and $6,000 for the chair. And I may like to speak to that amendment if it's seconded.
Is there a second to the motion made by Mr. Everett?
I understand it's been 16 years since there's been any change in how much our leaders have been paid. And in that period of time, the amount of work that is required has increased substantially. And I just think it is a fair amount of money to pay them. You need this?
No, I think I've got it. It's $4,000, Mr. Everett, to each of the members of the Select Board and $6,000 to the chair. Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Everett has moved to amend the motion currently pending by raising the sum to be paid to the Select Board to $4,000 and by raising the sum to be paid to the chairperson to $6,000. Is there further discussion on Mr. Everett's amendment? Mr. Agavi.
Spoon Agave, District 3. I would like to support this amendment wholeheartedly. I know I've been quite intimate with town workings now for 12 or 14 years. I have seen this job become increasingly complex year by year by year, and it really takes more time. It is not a 2-hour or a 4-hour a week position anymore. A little bit more money might enable more people to run for the office because perhaps they could afford to take a little extra time off. I just think overall it is well worth it and important, and I support it.
Mr. Wilmerding, you had raised your hand, I believe. Yes, please.
John Wilmerding, District 3. Last year I advanced a proposal to increase the Select Board salaries rather more than the current modest proposal. This would be a very minor increase in our budget. If we do this, the amount that it would increase the taxes for the individual taxpayer would be minuscule. I'd like to say that I believe, since we're calling this a salary, that we should pay our salaried Select Board members a living wage and pay them enough to compensate them for opportunities lost in their other fields of endeavor. We really, really appreciate their work, and they should be compensated accurately for it. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Point of inquiry takes precedence, so please. Would you state your name, please?
My name is Chris Lenoir, and I'm with District 2. And my question is, I was just informed by one of my fellow representatives here that this is a question that keeps coming up year in, year out as far as increasing salaries for the Select Board. And so my question is how come it's not part of the proposed budget originally rather than a motion on the floor?
Okay, that's not really a parliamentary question. That's more in the nature of a question, but you're standing there, so we will take it, and then we'll take Mr. Barber's comment, if that's okay. Ms. Sontag.
During the budget process, that question, when they're looking at the line item for salaries, they'll joke about increasing it. Thus far, the board has never felt comfortable increasing their own salaries. While I have the microphone, just briefly, I would like to say that we had 3 new board members this year. This year was an unprecedented year of activity for the board, and I would like to acknowledge the hard work that they've done. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work of the chair, Dick DeGray, during the fire, during the hurricane, during the other variety, you remember there we had several deaths with regard to murders that happened, and they had a special meeting with regard to how do we solve some of these issues. I just think this was a year that the work of the board, and in particular the chair, we worked very closely because we really needed to in this year. And the chair's $3,000 doesn't cover cell phone. And I use a cell phone. I call it a cell phone, and it's really important.
Mr. Barber.
Orion Barber, District 1. I have enormous respect for the Select Board, and I know that their workload has increased tremendously, and I think they do a wonderful job. But I'm going to vote against this. This is a doubling of the minuscule amount that we pay. And given the situation that our economy is in, and that the state of Vermont is in, and that Windham County is in, there are many people out there who are hurting beyond what any of us in this room can imagine. And even though it may seem as though it's a minuscule amount on somebody's taxes, I believe that this is, if an increase is to be made, this is much too big of an increase. I'm sorry, but that's what I'm going to vote on.
Further discussion. All the way in the back, Dr. Fagelson.
Bob Fagelson, District 1. If we do pass it, can you make it retroactive for 15 years?
We'll rule that one out of order,
okay.
Doctor.
This is something that comes up not necessarily every year, but definitely every few years. I agree with Orion Barber that this is not the time economically for us, even though this seems like a minuscule amount. The fact of the matter is, if you want to pay people what you think they deserve as the select board members, as purely without considering what the effects are going to be, we're talking about salaries that should be in the 20s and 30s, not $4,000 and $3,000. This is an amount that has been paid basically to cover expenses. And as I say, I don't think this is the time or place to make that increase, considering the economic situation in our country, our state, and our community.
The question is on Mr. Everett's motion to amend to increase the salary to $4,000 for the select board and $6,000 for the chairman. All the way back, Mr. Sprite.
I think you're doing a fine job with the names. And,
well.
Anyway, I think I might have proposed the last salary increase that actually passed, and I would agree that we're long overdue for it. I think it's penny wise and pound foolish to not do this. It is minor. I think especially given what they've been through this last year, it is a nice recognition of all the good work that they do. It is still just in the range of helping defray some of the expenses for taking on this volunteer position. I would not call it a salary, but I personally do appreciate all the work that you guys do. That allows me to focus on what I need to do, and this year has been a very hard year for me as well. I think given all the other things that we find we can make priorities, I think this is investing at the the people who, investing in the people who make those decisions to help us do well with this steering this relatively big ship that we have of a town, I think is well worth it, and may even save us money in the long run.
Mr. Phillips.
Thank you. Steve Phillips, District 3. I've not supported increases in the past. I'm going to support this one. I think our select board has done an incredible job, works incredibly hard, and this is only a small token of payment for all of that hard work. And I just do want to point out also that the reason this keeps coming up is because our charter requires us to set the compensation. So it will keep coming up because we need to do that. I suppose we could take a year off or two if we give them an increase this year. So thank you.
Chair would recognize Mr. Harvey.
George Harvey, District 3. This is an issue that I think is important, and the select board has been paid a token sum in the past and has clearly been doing a lot of work. I wonder if I could ask if someone or all of the members of the select board would like to tell us how many hours they put in and what their expenses are. If I knew the answers to those questions, I would feel more comfortable with. We have many suggestions here. I'd feel more comfortable with picking one of them.
The select board is interrogated if they choose to be so. And Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for that question, George. I put in a minimum, I believe, of 20 to 25 hours a week, minimum. Because of my position as the chair, I think when I wasn't the chair, I was at least putting in 20 hours a week. I don't get compensated, nor does anybody else on the board, for my cell phone, and I spend a considerable amount of time on my cell phone talking with the town manager and other people who call me. When I looked at this, when I heard that the compensation last time there was a raise was 1996, I actually think Bob was on the board then. And you're right, this is like Hershey bars for me. One's too many and 100's not enough. There's never really an appropriate number that you can come up with to compensate people. There isn't one person that I have served with or am presently serving with that said, I'm going to run for the select board or school board because of the compensation that I get. There's a reason my hair doesn't grow back. But I do this job because I've enjoyed it. It's been a great experience. The monetary compensation, although long overdue, and if I was sitting where you were, I would strongly support this because I think it's been, as it was stated, 16 years is a long time to go. And although we have talked about this numerous times, as I was one of you, a town meeting member, and now a select board member, it just seems we chuckle and laugh, and then we move on. I think the amount of time that if you asked me of what I spent last year on town business, I was spending close to, 30 to 40 hours a week. Accidents just don't go from 8 to 5. And all my fellow board members did an outstanding job, and this compensation, and you feel uncomfortable talking about it, is certainly modest. And do I think it would encourage other people to run? Maybe, but I hope people that want to run for the select board are running strictly for representing their community, because in the reality, the only other job that I know that pays less than this one is being a coach. and you do it for the love of the game. So I actually hope that you support this motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Baboulis, would you like to add to those thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add that since I've been a select board member, I've gone to a number of conferences and workshops for which I've paid myself because there is no line item for that. One of the recommendations I noticed in the Finance Committee report is that the select board get more training. And there are a lot of things out there that I would probably go to get more training for being on the select board if I had the money to pay for it. And, you know, from that perspective, I think this would be helpful.
Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would point out that during the budget deliberations that our board had, I suggested to the board that, as a matter of saving money, that we cut the salaries in half. The idea went over like a lead balloon, but the principle, I think, is quite strong. We do not run for this office for the money. Our democratic system is still an experiment in social history. It flies on gossamer wings, and the people you want to be in this job are people who want to be there and for all the right reasons. So I am going to vote myself against this, although I do feel that this motion could not be a more sincere form of flattery and confidence, and for that I'm very grateful to the body for this consideration. Let me just point out that there are members of this board who are loading for bear on the next budget, and everything is going to be in our sights. And let me just articulate very briefly some of the larger items that were sacrificed from the proposals for budget approvals: a road grader, a police cruiser, a shelter for rec department equipment.
Point of order?
Point of order, Mr. DeGray.
I think we're discussing the salaries of the select board. I think Mr. Chapman is delving off into areas of the budget which I don't think are germane.
With all due respect, Mr. DeGray, I think that Mr. Chapman was simply making the point that there are other things that you should be spending money on other than raising the salary. Is that what you were driving at, Mr. Chapman?
Yes.
In which case it would be germane, and the chair would rule that you can continue.
Okay, thank you. We chose also not to fund recycling coordinators, a sidewalk from Morningside Commons to town, an engineering study of the intersection at Citizens Bridge, all things that were very important in from my point of view. And for that reason, I think that flattering, honoring, and honor though it is to have this consideration, I think that it would be most appropriate to retain the status quo. And I thank you very much.
Before we take and I know there are a number of other people who would like to be heard on this, and we will get to you, but I would like to give the Select Board an opportunity to speak on this, and Mr. Gartenstein would be recognized next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm also going to vote against the amendment. I didn't take and run for the position because I was looking to get paid well, and I don't think whatever the salary that it's going to compensate, particularly for the time that I spend and the effort that I spend on the work. We looked very carefully at all of the line items in the budget over the course of the year, and I wasn't in favor of really increasing almost any of them, and I'm not going to be in favor of this. Thank you, Dart, though.
Mr. Davis.
Arthur Davis, District 3. In response to Mr. Chapman and Mr. Gartenstein's comments, I would just like to say, I think while I agree 100% that, in running for the select board, one's motivations should not be being compensated monetarily, but I do think that by increasing the salary, it would perhaps open up people who don't necessarily have the kind of income that others of us may have to even consider running for the select board if that is something that they would like to do. And so I will be supporting this because I feel like it's a statement of saying, people from all backgrounds and parts of our community can, may be able to consider dedicating part of their lives to this town in this way. So, thank you.
The member in the front. You.
Catherine Turnus, District 3. As somebody who just recently ran for office in this town, I have to say that the incentive to do so had absolutely nothing to do with how much money you were going to get. It had to do with the responsibility as a member of this community to decide how the government of this community is handled. And I will definitely vote against this, and I still plan to run again.
Thank you. The member here in the fourth row. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, I have laryngitis, but Rebecca Ballant, District 2. And I just want to say that one important piece is to consider if we do want to include other members of the community who don't have the economic means, people need to factor in, if they have two working people at home, whether they have enough money coming in order to pay for a sitter to watch the children so that someone can get to a meeting. And that's the reality. Most of our working families in town have two people working. And if they want to be part of this very important decision-making body of this town, that is something that gets factored in. Do I have money coming in to pay someone to watch my children so I can be part of the decision-making? It isn't about monetary compensation driving someone to seek election to the board. It's about the economics of, can I actually make this work? So I just want to echo what Mr. Davis had said. Thank you.
Mr. Fagelson, I believe, has already spoken once on this issue, and therefore, in the interest of being fair to everyone, I would...
Don't tease me like that.
Dr. Fagelson, sorry.
No, you can call me whatever you want.
There was a hand over here. Yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Call the question and we have a second. You got to recognize that.
I did not hear. Did anyone stand up and call? All right, there has been, I'm sorry, but there has been a motion to call the question. And who made the motion? We need to know. Paul Rounds, and it has been seconded. A motion to call the question requires a two-thirds vote. The question, it is not debatable, and the question is as follows. The question is on Mr. Everett's motion to amend Mr. Gartenstein's motion by raising the salary of the select board to four... Yes. Yes.
I believe we're voting to cease debate.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So to cease debate, we need a two-thirds vote. So I would like to... all parties, all members who are in favor of ceasing debate, please rise, and we do need two-thirds to cease debate.
all members, if you sit, please be seated. All members who are opposed to ceasing debate, please rise. It is the chair's opinion that the motion to cease debate has failed. It appears that the motion to cease debate has failed unless someone demands that we have a division on the issue. All right, it has failed, and we will now return to the underlying question, a recurring question of Mr. Everett's amendment, increasing the salary of the Select Board to $4,000 and of the chairperson of the Select Board to $6,000. Now, there was a gentleman who was prepared to speak, and I'd like to give him an opportunity to get back up and speak. Go ahead, sir. No, this is only for the Select Board.
Caleb Clark, District 2. I'll be quick. I'm kind of new, and I wanted to know if anyone had ever brought up or considered that once we, as a body, maybe figured out what we thought was fair compensation, that the cost of living increase would be automatic, so it would slowly rise, because if it doesn't do that, it's really falling every year as, you know, the cost of living increases. So I guess it's a question if that's ever been brought up or considered, if anybody knows.
Does anyone wish to respond to the question raised by Mr. Clark? Perhaps somebody in further debate. Is there any further discussion at this point? Mr. Borowski.
I was a little choked when Dart got up and raised it to 4,000 and 6,000. I would like the body to consider a more modest approach. I would consider that the Select Board members make a motion that the Select Board members be 3,000 and that the chairman be 5,000. I think if you understand the responsibilities, especially of the chairman, especially in this past year, I won't get involved in all the discussion about how great the board is, because I think they did a heck of a job, and they do a great job. But I think if you understand that the meetings in the afternoons at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, there's a times, these are a lot of times that are dedicated at supper time and just after supper. It disrupts a whole family program. And I don't think that the compensation is anywhere near in line. I just think that the boost that Dart approached was a little too much of a jump in this kind of an economy. So I would hope that I could get a second to a motion.
Mr. All right. If there is no objection, since the request has been seconded by Mr. Everett, who made the initial motion, to modify his motion to $3,000. The amendment would be $3,000 each for the Select Board and $5,000 for the chairman. If there is no objection, I'm going to accept that as a friendly amendment, as we sometimes call it. And the recurring question for your consideration then would be the Everett Amendment, which again would raise the salary to $3,000 for Select Board and $5,000 for the chairman. Is there further discussion?
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes,
Did the seconder of Dart's amendment agree to the acceptance of an amended amendment?
Dr. Fagelson, I think we treated this as a friendly amendment, which is a somewhat loose rule. However, does the person who seconded Mr. Everett's motion consent to the friendly amendment that was just made? Yes, I heard someone say yes. I'll accept that. The chair would recognize the lady in the red shirt.
Mary Kane, District 2. I don't think we heard from all the select board members. I could be wrong here. One's holding out. But I wanted to say that there is no doubt you have put in your time. This year has been an unusually difficult year. Many of those meetings have, in fact, gone till late hours after 9:30, 10 o'clock, sometimes even later with the open meeting rules. But I did want to say that to address Dora's commitment to do additional training, Marlborough College has outstanding free board training throughout the year, and I believe that we could use that and utilize it without a dime cost to our town, and I would like that you consider that too. And I will not support the increase because my district cannot afford to pay that increase.
Is there further discussion? All the way in the back, Mr. Annis, I believe.
Eric Annis, District 2, move the question.
Mr. Annis has moved the question, and it has been seconded. All those in favor of ceasing debate, which requires 2/3 approval, please rise and remain standing. You may be seated. All those opposed to ceasing debate, please rise. And it is apparent to the chair at this point that the motion to cease debate has been approved by the body, and therefore we will return to the amendment of Mr. Everett to increase the salary to $3,000 for the select persons and $5,000 for the chairman. Are you ready for that vote? All those in favor of the amendment, Mr. Everett's amendment, please signify by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed signify by standing. And the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and the Everett Amendment has been adopted. So, as a procedural matter, we have to return to the original motion, and the original motion then will read as amended, shall the salaries of the Select Board be set at $3,000 each, that the salary of the chairperson be set at $5,000, and that the Select Board be authorized to fix the salaries of all other town officials for the 2012 and 2012 to 2013 fiscal year. Are you ready for that vote? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by rising. You may be seated. And all those opposed, please indicate by standing. You may be seated. The ayes have it, and the Article 8 has been approved as amended by the Everett Amendment. Article 9, to see how much money the town will raise, appropriate, and expend to defray the expenses and liabilities. The chair would recognize Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the Select Board be authorized to raise and appropriate and expend the sum not to exceed $14,408,264 in order to defray to the extent all general fund expenses for the period of July 1, 2012 through June 30th, 2013, including all highway and Windham County taxes, and the Select Board be authorized to expend in addition any sum authorized for a special purpose under any article contained in the warning for this or any other special meeting, and interest at a rate of 1% per month be charged from due date of payment on any overdue payment of the town tax, installment, or portion thereof, and that the town taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1, 2012, shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments, payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then to the collector of taxes, and that such payments of the installments shall be made on or before 5 p.m. on August 15, 2012, November 15, 2012, February 15, 2013, and May 15, 2013. And I'd like to speak to the question.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded, and the chair would recognize Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Before I speak on the budget, I would like to welcome 2 new members to our team who weren't with us here last year at town meeting. And the first would be Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland, and our new Finance Director, who was with us through the budget process. Actually, both of them were John O'Connor, and they did an outstanding job and continue to do an outstanding job. I'd also like to thank Dave Gartenstein, actually, who filled in for me as I was out of town and did an excellent job at the informational meeting. I'm going to go over a couple of the highlights, and then I'm going to turn this over to Finance Director John O'Connor. The town ended the FY11 budget in the black with approximately $317,000. I think it shows strong commitment by our administration for making sure that we're keeping an eye on the bottom line. Other highlights, balanced budget of $14.6 million in expenditures and revenue. Of that $14.6 million in revenues, 13.2 is generated from property taxes, representing an increase of 1%, or approximately 1 cent on a tax rate. Of the increase expenditures, major increases are in bonds and notes, $137,725, or a 21% increase. Risk management, $96,000, or a 21% increase. And salary increases of $90,900, or a 1% increase. The town is experiencing only a modest increase in the grand list while expenditures continue to increase. To balance the budget, discretionary expenditures must be reduced or the tax rate must increase. Capital expenditures were greatly reduced for the FY13 budget, but this is not a permanent solution. And the truth of the matter is, all the boards that I've served on are acutely aware of the struggles that we are having of trying to grow our grand list. We have a huge infrastructure that we have to maintain. And as Chris pointed out before, there were several key capital expenditures that were taken out of this year's capital plan. One was a grader, one was a police cruiser. They will continue to be a challenge for us as a community as a whole. With dollars as tight as they are, and our equipment they're not, the grader was a $250,000 expenditure. But it is a piece of equipment that is utilized, heavily utilized, and when you're sitting here trying to make that decision whether you spend $250,000 or not, and what impact it's going to have on the taxpayers, that's very, very difficult for us, even though that piece of equipment is heavily used and needed. So, in the Finance Committee's report, I've been saying for years that we should revisit and have a healthy discussion about a 1% sales tax. I think at some point we're going to have to get there. We keep talking about affordability in our community, and each year the budget is based upon what we believe we can get passed at town meeting. And we've been very fortunate with this board and the past several boards that keeping an eye on the bottom line and not having 4 or 5% increases, I think we've done an admirable job. But be mindful that our grand list is stagnant and that there needs to be a good, healthy discussion about the possibilities of other revenues. And if it's not the sales tax, then we need to talk to our local legislators, to talk to the governor, to give towns that reside on the river another option for a sales tax, other than a sales tax, because people believe people will flock to New Hampshire. So we need the legislature to provide river towns with another option. And what that is, I don't know. But doing our budget year after year like we're doing is very difficult with the majority of the money coming from us. And I always let people know that renters are taxpayers. They just pay their taxes in a different way. So I'm going to turn this over to John O'Connor, and John, I'll let you finish up.
Thank you, Dick, and good morning, everyone. To give you a little perspective on the budget, as far as our revenues go, Dick said that 13.2 million of the 14.6 million revenues comes from property taxes. That's 90% of our revenue stream. So we're heavily reliant on property taxes to balance our budget. Our expenditures are at 14.6 million. And to give you some idea on where those expenditures are, we pay $2.7 million for employee benefits. We pay $2.3 million for our police department. We pay $1.7 million for our fire department. We pay $1.4 million for our public works department. And we pay $1 million for recycling and solid waste disposal. So those are some pretty large numbers for those few departments. This year, our capital expenditures that are funded with cash from the general fund are $474,000. That's a drop from $1.1 million this year. So that's a considerable reduction in the cash that the general fund is providing to fund our capital expenditures. And we can't do that. We can't put off these capital expenditures indefinitely. At some point, we will have to come up with money to fund those capital expenditures. So this year, that's how we balanced the budget. It was a struggle. We worked very hard to come up with a budget that had a very, very modest increase in the tax rate, 1 cent or 1%, which is just a little over 1 cent, as Dick said. And we did it by reducing our capital expenditures. And that's really, I guess, all I have to say right now about the budget. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have as you've looked through that. And but I guess that gives you kind of a little bit of an overview on where we are with our budget next year. Thank you very much.
Is there further discussion on Article 9? Yes, sir.
Chris Lenoir, District 2. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just, maybe somebody on the Select Board could speak to one question I have about the 1% sales tax, the penny tax, applying, or not applying, excuse me, to food, fuel, and clothing. I just wonder if any consideration was given to exempting medicine from that as well.
The administration is interrogated. Mr. DeGray.
It is, and I want to make sure that actually there was a letter in the paper today talking about this body, talking about having a vote, I think, on 1% sales tax. It is not. So from that, your question is medicine is exempt. We do, just as a point of order to you, we do already have a 1% rooms, meal, and alcohol tax in play. And if you look in your budget under revenue, that brings in roughly $300,000 to $310,000 a year. And again, if you're, I think at another discussion, I don't want to get into the 1% sales tax, but I think it's something we have to have a debate about. There are many things on the exempt list for a 1% sales tax, but that's for another day, another time. Thank you.
Further discussion. Mr. Wilberding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. Mr. Moderator, I rise in support of the motion. For the past year, I have worked as Vice Chair of the Town Finance Committee, and owing to the diligence of our Chair, Spoon Agave, I only had to fill in once. And we've met roughly 24 times considering matters of financial and economic importance to the town. By the way, we are a committee of you, the body here assembled, the town representatives, and not a committee of the select board or accountable to any other body than you. And we would like to see other people on the Finance Committee this coming year, and I would like to let you folks know that I am interested in helping out again this coming year on the Finance Committee. We held the administration's actions financially and economically, I believe, to a high degree of accountability as we expanded our purview to include larger economic issues in accordance with the recently voted changes to our town charter. And we would like I would like to say individually that I'm satisfied that due diligence has been done in our town to keep our expenses low and to keep taxes low. And I think much more needs to be done, as has been implied, to explore other possible sources of revenue. But in the meantime, I believe this is a good faith effort.
The motion is on the budget. Dr. Fagelson.
Bob Fagelson, District 1. I know that the sales tax is not on the agenda for this thing, but I would just like to discuss it briefly for a moment.
We have a point of order, Mr. Phillips.
Sure.
I do think this would be a great discussion. I really don't think it's germane, and unfortunately it's crept in twice already to our discussions. If it keeps going, we're not really voting or discussing the article that we're considering.
The article that is currently under consideration is the town budget. And if your...
I submit that the chairman of the select board has brought up the sales tax proposition, and because of that, it's on the floor.
It does that, and that has a bearing on the town budget, does it not?
Of course.
Okay, well...
No.
Not this year's budget, but it will in future budgets.
All right.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. DeGray.
The only 1% money that affects this budget is something, as I stated, the rooms and meals tax, which this body approved several years ago. The 1% sales tax is not a part of this budget, nor, as Mr. Fagelson, maybe next year's budget, until this body would approve such a tax.
Then why was it brought up?
I brought it up because of the revenue portion of the budget.
My feeling is once something's brought up, it's on the floor and
Well,
it's open
I think
for
we'll let
discussion.
the moderator decide that. I think this might be a better question if we want to discuss the 1%, and I'm perfectly willing to do that. I think we should do it under other business.
I'm going to rule that it is more appropriate for other business. However, Mr. Fagelson, you are always very brief, so I'll let you continue.
Extremely brief. Mr. DeGray foisted a 1% rooms and meals and alcohol tax on us a few years ago when this town said no to a sales tax. A sales tax added on to this. We're right on the river, right across the river from New Hampshire. Add on to that the possible economic disaster we might face if Vermont Yankee leaves. I think talking about increasing our taxes is insane.
Again, the issue is on the town budget. We do have to maintain a sense of germaneness, if you will, if there is such a word. I think there is. And that means that our questions at this stage and our comments should relate to the budget. However, if anyone wants to be heard on any other unrelated matters, we do have the article for other business, and we can certainly sit down and hear anyone out under other business for anything that might not be covered by an article today. So to return to the recurring question on the budget, is there further discussion? The gentleman in the middle back here.
Chaim Siegel, District 3. This is really a point of clarification. I'm not sure where the $14,408,000 proposal came from. Looking at the packet, I see a proposed budget of $14,639,000. Can somebody explain to me what's happening there?
The town manager, Ms. Sontag, is interrogated, or Mr. O'Connor.
What you see in the total budget includes all the separate articles. So that's why it's a little higher in the budget. We tried each year to show you what the total budget would look like when all separate articles are included in it. So that $14,600,000 some includes the special assessment for the DID, includes the salaries of the select board, et cetera. But because those are separate articles, the actual amount that's approved, that we seek approval for in Article 9 is that total of the $14 million minus all of those separate articles. And then, so obviously even that $14,600,000 is going to change a little bit because of the amendment to Article 8. So that's the reason.
Thank you. You answered my next question, too.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Kevin Maloney from District 3. I'd like to make a motion for an amendment and then speak to it. The amendment would be to move to reallocate $75,000 from street paving and improvements to intersection improvements.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
Yes.
The body does not have the authority to direct line item adjustments.
Mr. Maloney, that is correct. Under our state statute, the only thing that we can do, we can move to amend by adding or subtracting money to the budget. We cannot actually direct the select board where to spend that money. We can't tell them you've got to spend it on parking or paving. That's their purview. You could move to amend by increasing or decreasing, but otherwise it's considered to be improper under state law.
Okay. So, I mean, could this be done in two motions then?
No, you can't. It must be warned. The only way to bring it up is for actually to be an article that is warned. I would recommend that one thing you could do clearly is have a discussion privately with Mr. DeGray. You certainly could attend a select board meeting and bring this up, or you might even want to have it put on an article, special article, for a subsequent meeting. But unfortunately, the way the law reads, we can only act on things that are actually warned in the warning, and it will not allow us to make changes to the substance of the motion.
Okay. And then would it be appropriate to add in 75,000 to intersection improvements?
Again, you cannot add money to a specific slot.
Okay.
You could add that, you could request that the budget be increased by 7, but you can't add it to a specific slot.
Okay.
Okay? I hope that explains. If not, I would call on Mr. Fisher for further discussion on that topic.
You know, I guess what the intent is for this body to give some feedback to the select board on how they're choosing to spend their roadway improvement money. And I'd like the opportunity to figure out how to structure that.
Again, there's a couple things you could do. If you want to bring this up under other business, it's not binding, it is purely advisory. You could at least be heard. The rest of the body could hear your concerns and the basis for them, but for the purposes of this motion, it's not germane.
Okay.
Ms. Boboulas.
Just a point of clarification. Mr. Maloney could move to increase the budget by $75,000 and then lobby the select board to spend the money on doing intersection improvements.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah.
I would call at this point, just for a moment here, on the town manager to respond.
Just as a point of clarification, I understand what Mr. Maloney is he wants to ensure that some amount of money is actually earmarked for intersection improvements. But for clarification, under our paving, paving isn't just road paving, it is also all the improvements that go along with it. So we wouldn't necessarily need a separate line item for intersection improvements, but that could be brought up at a board meeting when the board is looking at and when the department head is talking about the paving projects that are coming forward, because those do come forward to the board because they're large projects that are bid. So that would be, I'm just trying to point out another avenue.
Yeah, no, I think it would be appropriate for me to come back under other business.
Thanks, Mr. Maloney. Other discussion, please. Yes.
I hope I can interrogate the town attorney, because I'm really confused about the procedure here. It seems to me just 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, we raised the amount we amended an article about salaries. I'm confused why we can't amend this amount.
I will be happy to call on Mr. Fisher to respond to that, Mr. Dimes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The budget amount can be amended through a motion to amend, either upward or downward. The body does not have what we call a line item veto authority. So if there is a motion to amend to raise the budget by adding in a certain amount of money, that is absolutely an acceptable motion to amend. If that passes by a majority, then that would amend the budget upward. That being made, the select board, assuming that motion to amend were to pass, the select board is not under a legal obligation to put that in the line item of intersection or paving. The select board may very well do that, as the select board does its best to listen to the sentiment of this body, but it's not legally required to do that. So the motion to amend can be made if that's one option, and the other option is to raise this under other business or come to a select board meeting as far as what the board wishes to do in its paving projects and with regard to its line striping and all of the issues that go to pedestrian safety.
So, Mr. Fisher, then the total budget figure could be amended, but not the individual items?
That is correct, Mr. Dimes.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you. Other discussion on the budget? The question is, shall the Select Board be authorized to raise, appropriate, and expend the sum not to exceed $14,408,264 in order to defray to that extent all general fund expenses for the period of July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013, including all highway and Windham County taxes, and the Select Board be authorized to expend, in addition, any sum authorized for special purposes under any article contained in the warning for this or any other special meeting, and interest at a rate of 1% per month to be charged from the due date of payment on any overdue payment of the town tax, installment or portion thereof, and that the town taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1, 2012 shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then to the collector of taxes, and that such payment of the installments shall be made on or before 5 p.m. on August 15, 2012, and November 15, 2012, and February 15, 2013, and May 15, 2013. Are you ready for that question? The gentleman in the back.
Yeah, I'll make an amendment, and then I'd like to speak to it. So I'll move to add $75,000 to the budget.
Okay, so Mr. Maloney moves to add $75,000 to the budget. Is there a second to Mr. Maloney's motion? There is a second. The article and motion has been moved to increase by $75,000. Is there discussion on the Maloney amendment? Do you wish to speak to it, Mr. Maloney?
I would like to speak to it.
Go ahead.
I think, over the years, there's, this town is a very densely, the inner part of the town, from I-91 to the Connecticut River, is really a pedestrian zone. It's a sort of dense downtown area. And in general, I don't think the decision makers in this town appreciate that. And they seem to be stuck in a mindset from 20 or 25 years ago of looking at efficiently moving vehicles through, wherever they're moving them. And I think when we're in this inner core or along Route 9 going to West Brattleboro, we need to acknowledge it as a pedestrian zone. And I've heard with the 3 recent pedestrian deaths, I've heard statements coming from the Select Board that there's really nothing more that we can be doing to make our streets safer for the pedestrians. And then statements that seem to be blaming the pedestrians for the deaths that have occurred. And so I think if people have traveled down to Northampton, they see a different balance between the pedestrians and the motor vehicles. And that's all developed. It's pedestrian empowerment, and it's giving the pedestrian the tools to safely cross streets and to move along streets. And, I think, these tools range from the very inexpensive, additional signs, additional pavement markings, to the much more expensive or the moderate priced items such as intersection improvements, bump outs. If when you were driving down Western Ave, if you started seeing bump outs where there were crosswalks, the bump outs allow the pedestrians to move out into the street safely, but it also allows you to move the pedestrian signs that are at the back of sidewalk to out in the street because they're on the bump outs. And it really makes for a much safer environment. I think it's, this town is focused on taking all their money that's going towards paving and just putting it into paving and not putting it into intersection improvements. Back in 2004, the Traffic Safety Committee worked with the Union Hill Western Ave neighborhood, and they worked over a series of meetings, and they came to some agreements to approve some changes to the Union Hill, Cedar Street, Western Avenue intersection. On January 18, 2005, the Select Board approved two motions. The first motion was to approve improvements to the Western Ave Union Hill intersection. The second motion they approved was to allocate up to $25,000 from the capital paving budget for the Western Ave Union Hill intersection project. This project was approved in 2005. It is on page 79 listed on the capital program. The capital program goes through 2019. It is unfunded through 2019 and was approved in 2005. My intent of adding the $75,000 in is so that improvements can be made at intersections for pedestrian enhancement. I think it's a component. There's a lot that can be done at low cost, but there's things that should be done in this town to enhance pedestrian safety that takes money. Thank you.
The question is on the Maloney amendment to increase the budget by $75,000. Ms. Erfer.
Kathy Erfer, District 1. I would actually like to hear from Steve Barrett on if this additional money were added to the budget, how that actually might be able to be implemented through the Department of Public Works, or if it's constrained by the timing of how roads are updated, or some response to the reality of whether that would be effective or not by adding that money in this particular year.
Mr. Barrett is here.
Morning.
Morning.
If this was added to the budget, it would go through a process. What I would envision is that traffic safety would look at some options for safety improvements, and then it would eventually go forwarded to the board, and then the items would be bid out. When we did Union Hill, that was a process to have an engineer look at some safety alternatives. We do have some projects on the books we've applied for with Safe School. We've been denied several times, so we do have some preliminary plans available. But the process, in my mind, would be to go through traffic safety, town manager, and then ultimately the select board.
The chair would recognize Mr. Gartenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Since the pedestrian vehicle collisions over the last months, the Select Board has been focusing significant attention on pedestrian safety and on measures that can be taken to improve safety within the community. Over the course of the last Traffic Safety Committee meetings, which involve a Select Board member, the town manager, and the various department heads, we've been considering a series of steps that can be taken. And at the last Select Board meeting, there actually was an inventory
of approaches that we're going to be taking over the coming months and years to address pedestrian safety. We have been seeking alternate funding sources and programs in order to address education of both drivers and pedestrians in order to make sure that everybody is aware of the factors that can lead to these crashes. In addition, we have begun an inventory both of the crosswalks within town and the lighting within town in order to assess whether that's maximizing the safety and visibility of pedestrians, and so that everybody can see what's going on. Other steps are being taken to inventory that includes consideration whether we'll be painting the crosswalks twice a year, besides questioning whether we have crosswalks all in the right places and whether additional crosswalks are needed, whether different types of painting is necessary. I think that at this time, there's not a perceived need from the administration for additional cash to make this happen. Rather, we are in the process of inventorying what steps can and should be taken. I think that before we have a figure for any given projects, simply saying $75,000 for intersection improvements doesn't particularly address globally the issues that we're confronting with respect to pedestrian safety. So at this time, I'm opposed to this amendment, recognizing that we are working at this time to improve pedestrian safety, and if we need additional money to do that, we certainly will come back and ask for it.
I believe Mr. Barber had his hand up earlier.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Orion Barber, District 1. I hear Mr. Gartenstein's statement that he's opposed to adding the money. That's okay with me, but it's also okay with me to add the money. I simply want to give you some anecdotal support for your focus on the matter of pedestrian safety. I'm a walker, and I walk in twice a week for sure from West B along Western Ave. Western Ave from about Spruce Street, I think, is 30 miles an hour. Farther in town it's 25. If you think 30 miles an hour is routinely and carefully observed along there, you can think again. As a walker, I usually walk in on the, well, I have to walk where the sidewalks are. So from Green Mountain Chapel, for example, the sidewalk is on the south side of Western Ave. And so I walk on the south side, it gets me across the interstate, and I walk down to opposite Trinity Lutheran, and that's where there's a crosswalk. There's no bulb out there. So I tentatively step toward the road, and I stare into the eyeballs of approaching drivers, and they're pretty good. And some people will start slowing down way back there, and God love them. And I get across safely, and then I get down to Spruce Street, and then Cedar, and I try to. My practice was, and I know I'm going on too long. My practice was to turn off my hearing aids because I don't need to hear the roaring of the traffic, except cars have gotten much more silent. So when I come to an intersection where I want to cross the crosswalk, I am for sure doing this. And sometimes that's almost not enough. But I just recommend to everybody in this room walk around this beautiful town, you will see that you are in a different frame of mind, a different mindset from when you are behind the wheel. I'm as capable as anyone of letting my car go a little too fast. But when you're on your feet, you see stuff you never would see, beauties of this town. And you also get a little bit of a feeling that maybe there's something out there waiting to get you. Thanks.
Mr. Dimes. Mr. Harvey, sorry.
George Harvey, District 3. I'd like to thank Mr. Maloney for obviously putting a lot of attention on this, and I think this is a very important question. And nevertheless, I will vote against the amendment. I walk like Orion Barber a lot. In fact, I put in about 2 miles a day walking through Brattleboro. And in the last few years, I have been very nearly hit on 5 occasions while I was walking on a marked crosswalk. On one occasion, I was hit, fortunately with no damage. But I'd like to tell you all about one occasion, which was I was walking from the parking garage to the co-op, and as I stepped off the curb on the crosswalk, marked crosswalk, a young woman pulled out of the up to the exit from the parking lot across the street and came to a stop. I could see her look to the left and to the right as I walked across the street. Halfway across the street, I had to dodge her car as she suddenly came out of the parking lot without any regard for the fact that I was there. She was very, very frightened when she realized I was there, slammed on the brakes, stopped, apologized to me profusely. But the point that I'm making is additional signs, additional crosswalks are not going to help whatever unless we can get the drivers to pay attention to the fact that people are on the road. She had failed to see me. Other drivers had also failed to see me. 2 of them stopped and apologized because they had failed to see me when I was very clearly there. I think what we have to do is to get people to pay attention to small people like myself.
Dr. Fagelson has had his hand up for a long time.
Thank you. Bob Fagelson, District 1. I think we need a little bit of a reality check here. All of these pedestrians who were hit by cars over the last couple of months, if I'm not mistaken, the majority, if not all of them, were crossing the streets illegally. $75,000 isn't going to change that. Also, George Harvey and Orion Barber almost being hit by crazy drivers, $75,000 isn't going to restore the sanity of these people. I think that this is throwing money at a problem that is not going to solve the problem.
Ms. Burke.
Molly Burke, District 2. And as a member of the House Transportation Committee, we discuss these issues a lot. And I think it's wonderful that we're having this conversation. So I am not sure how I feel about adding the $75,000. I just want to say a few things, some information. I've been talking to the bike ped coordinator at the State Department of Transportation about trying to get some money. There is some money in their budget for safety to try to get some groups that already have a proven track record of education and enforcement kinds of actions to come to Brattleboro. I've been talking with the town manager about that. So I'm working on that to see if we can bring some state money into this. We definitely need education of drivers, education of motorists, and the engineering to support that. So it's a really complex problem. But I would like to say I think that a lot of people, that's the issue, is people do not think that anyone else is going to be on the road but a car. And I think that that is a culture change that we all need to work on. We can work on it by walking more, putting more people out on the sidewalks, more bicyclists. In Montpelier, where I spend a considerable amount of time, there is a very different culture there, for the most part. If you actually almost look like you're going to step off, you haven't even stepped off the curb into the crosswalk, a car will stop. I don't know how you change that culture, but I think that with a lot of education and a really concentrated program, Brattleboro could really, I think we could do something very significant. And I just want to mention also that AARP Vermont has been working a lot on this issue. They were the main force behind the passage of the Complete Streets legislation that the legislature passed last year, which mandated that in any new project at the municipal or state level, that the project needs to take into account the needs of all users of the transportation system. And there are some outs there about expense and all that, but it means it sort of represents a cultural change that roads are not just for cars. And the town, through the planning department, was successful in getting a grant from AARP to specifically to look at a portion of Canal Street from Maple Street to the interstate. And there is a group now working on that to make suggestions about slowing traffic on that section, making it a more walkable, rideable, safer place. So I will continue to pursue funding at the state level, and I think that we need to all come together and in some kind of cohesive way to address the engineering and the educational aspects of this problem.
It is now 11 o'clock, and I see several hands of people who would like to speak on the amendment. However, we've been at this for 2.5 hours, so I think we'll declare a 10-minute recess to return at 10 minutes after 11. The meeting will come to order. The question before the Assembly is on the Maloney Amendment to increase the budget by $75,000. The chair would recognize the woman in the middle who's had her hand up for quite some time. Mrs. Kane.
Is that on?
It is.
Great. I'm here, Mary Kane from District 2. Last year you kindly let me speak briefly to the Austin School and the deaf community that is here in Brattleboro. And I cannot tell you more strongly enough that Gary Lumbra, who was a deaf person in our community, was unable at that time to cross from going to church and get home safely. And I'm here today because in addition to that unfortunate death, I was coming today to this meeting, walking, and every day, in case you haven't noticed and you haven't paid attention, there is no sidewalk on the Walgreens side to get to this school, and no crosswalk from Canal Canal Street and Fairview, except at that point until you get to the high school. And we have hundreds of students walking every single day with no sidewalk and no crosswalks in a very dangerous area. And I cannot personally think of a more appropriate way of helping our community become a safer pedestrian and bicycling area than to spend $75,000. That is not anywhere near the amount of money any life is worth. And I believe strongly that if we pass this and allow our town and Steve Barrett's crew to put in the implementation that we need to make them safer, that will in fact make it safer. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is on the Maloney Amendment to increase the budget by $75,000. Mr. Webster.
Hopefully I can make this brief. I tend to oppose the amendment reluctantly because I feel that money spent on traffic should be based on planned needs as identified and not throw out dollars and then find the solutions later on. I think Mr. Maloney would be a valuable addition to the Town Traffic Committee. The questions he raises are significant. I strongly disagree with Dr. Fagelson when he said there's nothing you can do about it. Communities around this country have worked on safety issues, and it helps. Northampton has a different culture. That's what they have down there. And it is easier on pedestrians. So there are things that we can do. So I would ask the selectmen to actually expand the box, if you will, in thinking about traffic safety and pedestrian safety, and take another back look at everything else, call in whatever experts you need, and then come to us with a plan. I know you're working on it, David, and I appreciate that. I'm just saying maybe you ought to expand it because this community, I think, is very concerned about this. Kevin raises very valid questions, and I hope you would use his expertise and interest as we go forward. And even though I'm suggesting we don't spend the money now, I think maybe we'll need to spend some in the future.
Mr. Sprite.
I'd like to say that I appreciate the sentiment of this amendment. I also like to recognize that we have put in and taken out bump outs, and we've had all kinds of changes that have unintended consequences in terms of plowing, availability of parking. The town has been reducing parking spaces all over the place, which is one of my ongoing concerns lately. We also have other modes of transportation that aren't being considered. I have a budding cyclist, and there have been things that we've done over the years to make things safer for bicyclists in terms of bicycle lanes. Way back when, taking out those grates that only went one way in line with the traffic, which bicycle wheels fell in. Thankfully, those went away many decades ago. I think bump outs perhaps create a hazard for cycling. They certainly make plowing a lot harder. I think the testimony today has made it clear that a big issue here is we're trying to find a structural solution that we can throw money at that we need, where what we perhaps need to address is a behavioral problem. And we need to figure out how to change the driving culture, perhaps. I often find myself stopping for pedestrians where the traffic going the other way doesn't seem to be ready to stop, and I've flashed my lights at people and occasionally gotten their attention so they stop so that people can cross. Again, I appreciate the sentiment. I'm, for the moment, going to be voting against it because it doesn't seem to have a plan behind it. And I appreciate the Select Board's coming to us with a fairly responsible budget. And I'm hoping in the future that, as far as the budget goes in general, that we take Spoon's lead, perhaps, and really look creatively at the whole thing and perhaps find ways that we can either reduce the budget more through more creative efforts or use the money more widely and wisely in a forward-looking way to reduce our energy usage and perhaps other expenses that are increasing.
Chair would recognize Mr. Skoll.
A couple points. I kind of wish that money wasn't part of this conversation because I think it's probably going to get voted down because people are hesitant to add money to the budget. But money does make a difference, and one of the reasons that Northampton is so successful in protecting pedestrians is that you pay a lot of money if you don't stop in the crosswalks. And I don't know if I didn't know what the town or state law was regarding crosswalks until I just asked one of the officers. And if you're standing on the curb, traffic doesn't have to stop. You have to step into the crosswalk in order to for traffic to stop. And there's no sign that indicates that. There's no way for people to know that. So that's one small change that could happen, I think, pretty quickly. But the education part of it, the behavior changing part of it, is going to take a lot more time and a lot more investment. One of the things that would help significantly is if the police department, if the select board directed the police department to vigorously enforce the jaywalking statute and the crosswalk statutes, to really make it, and that would bring money in, and that's one of the ways that societies have decided to change behavior, is to make people pay when they don't behave in appropriate ways. So my suggestion would be that the select board make immediate moves in those directions. Thanks.
The question is to whether you wish to approve the Maloney Amendment to raise the budget by $75,000. Mr. Cox. Okay.
I'm Doug Cox, District 1. I feel comfortable supporting this amendment. We've heard from Steve Barrett that any project that goes forward would go through an extensive planning and vetting process. We've heard from the Select Board that they are not ready to spend any more money than they need to. If we approve this, we do not require that the Select Board spend it. I think we can trust them to spend it only if it is in the town's best interest to do so. And we've also heard from Molly Burke that there may be state money coming around for this that will probably require a match. So it seems to me like it makes sense to approve it and expect that the Highway Department, the Planning Department, the Select Board will use their good judgment to use it in the best interest of the town.
Dr. Abel's had his hand up for quite a while.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Peter Abel, District 1. I consider myself to be the Windham County's expert on bicycle automobile collisions, being a sort of semi-survivor of two of them. I really don't think that spending any additional money is going to make any difference. I agree with Mr. Sprite, that we need a cultural change in people's attitudes when driving, bicycling, and walking. Marion, my wife, just told me about some young kids who just walked right out into a crosswalk without looking, daring the drivers to hit them. And in my view, that's just selfish behavior. And I think that people need to realize when they're driving cars that they're operating a very heavy weapon, and it does terrible damage when it hits people. So I agree that we need to have a cultural change. Thanks.
Ms. Davison?
I'm going to vote for this amendment. I don't usually vote for just a blanket amount of money, but I believe that some of the improvements that are going to be necessary to really physically change some of the crosswalks will take some money, and I don't want to wait another year to do this, given the difficulties the Select Board are having in trying to prioritize money. I walk a lot in Brattleboro now, and I know particularly on Western Avenue and Putney Road, the drivers are not expecting to see people cross the streets, so that they don't really pay attention to the signs, not because they're bad drivers, but they're not expecting to. So we definitely need ways of slowing traffic in those two major entranceways into town, along which many pedestrians walk. So I support this because I do believe it's going to take some money, blinking lights, bump outs, whatever, in order to slow traffic down on some of those major thoroughfares. And so I speak in favor of this.
The question, again, is on the Maloney Amendment to increase the budget by $75,000. Mr. Davis.
Andy Davis, District 3. I would favor, as a statement of changing the culture, saying that this is worth adding to the budget to deal with. Drivers today and I'm going to admit myself as well. We're incredibly hurried in our cars, distracted. I personally don't own a cell phone, but I see people coming down Union Hill, not stopping at the stop sign, talking on the phone. It's not that uncommon. We've had accidents in this county. There are electronic devices that people think they can use while they drive. Northampton's been mentioned. They have signs in the middle of the road saying that this is a crosswalk. I find that downtown with parking, and that was an interesting point, that you have to step into the line of traffic before you're protected as a pedestrian. That's an interesting irony. I think that the culture has gotten that the car is king in this culture, and people just assume that their right of way takes total precedence. And we're not going to change that unless we invest in some infrastructure to make it safer. We need to make it absolutely clear. One of the intersections I find people are most respectful to pedestrians is right by the post office, catty corner to the TD Bank, because you can see the pedestrians. There's no parking there, and pedestrians are incredibly visible standing there waiting to cross. And there are many other places in town where you cannot see that a pedestrian is waiting. And I think if we're going to change this, I challenge people to count the number of times you see cars actually stop at stop signs. I think it's a symptom of the fact that moving in a car is considered an inalienable right from the Creator. I also think, just as a little bit of a lighthearted comment, the yield signs that we have for entering the interstate should be placed on the interstate to yield for people coming onto the interstate. Because the new culture is coming onto the interstate, you guys that are on the road, get out of my way. I'm getting on the highway now. So I think it's all part of the culture, but we're not going to change it without investment in time and infrastructure. Thank you.
Mr. DeGray.
Mr. Maloney, I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I really do. And I can tell you that everybody here on the board is extremely concerned about what's happened. I can tell you that Tuesday night, after leaving the select board meeting at 10 after 10, I've been living in town for 28 years, 29 years. And as I drove up Estey Street to go home, as I went around the corner, I almost hit a pedestrian. Now, there's no sidewalk on the easterly side of Estey Street. In my 28 years in town, I have never seen a pedestrian walking on the side with no sidewalk. And so I had to swerve. He had a black shirt on, in dark, and I almost hit him, and I'm saying to myself, God almighty, how's that going to look? Select board member runs over pedestrian 20 minutes after having a discussion about pedestrian safety. And it doesn't make any difference if this amendment is $10,000 or $100,000 until we know how to spend the money and what to spend the money on, because you were talking about bulb outs. Several years ago, we put bulb outs on Guilford Street to calm the traffic down. We've taken them out because it was causing the people on their bicycles to get out into the flow of traffic, creating an unsafe situation for the people on their bike. It's great that we want to put money towards this, and I applaud you and all of you who have stood up to support it. But let us do our job and find out the solutions that we need to implement and what it's going to cost us. Because, as I just stated, this could be $50,000, it could be $100,000, it could be $200,000, and it might not be enough to do what we want to do. So let the board, along with the Traffic Safety Committee, do its job. And there's no one here that's going to give us a bad reason not to do it. But let the board do what you elected us to do, and then come back to you. If we can't find the money in the existing budget, then we're going to say to you, this is our plan, This is what we're going to implement, along with an educational piece, which Barb may talk about, because we're going to do that as part of what David had recommended in traffic safety meeting a couple of weeks ago. So let us do the right thing, and very laudable, again, for you to put money here, but let's not just throw a minimal amount at it. Let us come back and say, if we need signage, and if we need to change our ordinances to say it is a heavy fine for jaywalking, then let us do the whole piece as one and not piecemeal. Thank you.
Ms. Barboulas?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to remind everybody before I speak that there's a lot of people that have been standing up and speaking and not giving their name in their district, and could please remember to do that for the television audience.
Thank you.
I appreciate Mr. Maloney's effort. Sitting from this side of the table, I don't want $75,000 that's not specifically designated, because we don't have a plan. And some of what we've been talking about is changing a mindset. And we're not just talking about changing a mindset and a culture of the people that live in this community, but we're talking about a lot of state roads. Representative Burke talked about the efforts that they're trying to make to change things in V-Trans, but that's a long way away from changing that mindset. So we have to make sure that if we're going to spend money, that it's not going to be what we got downtown, which has sped up traffic and in most places made it less pedestrian friendly. So, you know, let's make sure that what we're putting money towards is actually going to do what we want.
Town Manager, Ms. Sondag.
Thank you. I just want to make a couple of quick points. One is that I've heard several different times in different places that the board or the town manager or the town has said there's nothing we can do. And I don't recall that ever being said by anyone. I think we immediately started out by looking at things and seeing and looking at our responsibilities and what we could do, and I think we continue to do that. I also see the safety issue as a three-legged stool. It's the pedestrians, it's the drivers, and it's the town who's responsible for the infrastructure. I think we could be here all day if everybody got to stand up and tell their story of either from the perspective of a driver or from a bicyclist or from a pedestrian, their near miss. I'm going to beat Lee Stuckey to it and say that on Thursday I was walking back to the town offices. I was talking on my cell phone with the attorney and walked out in front of Lee. And she stopped, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Although I did see her today, I didn't realize it was her. She said, do you remember? She was very kind. She didn't use any bad language, but said that was me. And I said, my first thought was, and I hope the headline read, pedestrian's fault. Because, and she assured me she would have made sure it did. With that said, though, there are various things that we need to keep in mind that make us different. I agree that we need a culture shift. We also need to acknowledge that we're one of the few towns who has a Route 9, a Route 142, a Route 5 that comes in every area. When I hear people talking about where the areas are, that's where they're talking about. They're talking about Western Everett, which is Route 9. They're talking about Route 5. And they take a different type of attention because they're state property in different parts. And they, in different areas, they can be very wide, and so they do take a different type of attention. I also want to let you know that there are a number of groups here who have education programs going on. Safe Routes, Safe Kids, Healthy Communities, AARP, the Vermont Bike and Pedestrian Coalition, along with V-Trans. We are having a meeting next Thursday at 2, or 10 or sometime on Thursday, I don't remember when, so we can talk with those different agencies and talk about what their educational programs are, because I don't really necessarily think the town needs to do a new one. I think we need to integrate, we need to know what's out there, we need to integrate, coordinate, and piggyback on those that are existing. And I think cultural changes are very slow. One of the other things I am cognizant of, painfully, is we have had many large projects in the town, and we'll continue to have a lot of large projects in the town that are being, they're very, if you go to a traffic safety meeting, what you'll normally find is that everything ends up going to, okay, Steve, can you take care of that? And what we've asked that department to do is a $32 million wastewater treatment plant project. This year we have about a $600,000 sidewalk project. We have about $1.5 million of Irene work, and every year we have an additional approximately, you have $300,000 in your budget for paving, which is also infrastructure work, and with what we get from the state, it actually comes up to closer to about $700,000 of work. To add, I think what we're missing the point, and what I've said at other meetings, is we're not being strategic. And that's what we need to change. That's what the town needs to change, is we need to be looking at things in a more strategic manner. We're going to be working with AARP to help us in the beginning of May, to help us do some citizen surveys, citizens analysis, similar to what was done when they identified Canal Street, to help us identify where are the areas, where do we need crosswalks. We haven't done anything with pedestrian counts. I didn't even know you could do pedestrian counts until recently. The state has started a focus on that. They've asked they've asked regional planning commissions to do more of a focus on pedestrian counts, because that's going to tell us, do we need to get rid of some crosswalks? Do we need to add some crosswalks? And we also need to review our criteria for where a crosswalk can be. There was the crosswalk where I walked out in front of Lee was perfectly signed, perfect sight vision. What failed? Luckily, not Lee's brakes. So with that, the other thing with we are doing directed patrols. We have grant money coming in from the governor's highway safety program, where the chief it will be sending directed patrols to monitor both those issues of vehicles not stopping for pedestrians, those vehicles making right turns on red where they shouldn't be, and to look at pedestrians who are not making good decisions about where they cross and when they cross. You'll recall it wasn't too long ago when our police department did a similar issuance of tickets. We issued about 8 tickets, 9 tickets, and it was not people weren't very happy, and we got a lot of grief for that. This time we're giving a lot of people notice. We're going to be doing some public announcements of that so that everybody's aware that this is what we're going to be doing. So those are just a few of the things that we are doing. It's not enough. It's not all we need to do. We need to get better at strategically addressing the issues and doing it in a and addressing infrastructure in a systematic and prioritized way. Thank you.
First of all, if you have if you want to call a question, I'd like you to raise your hand. I'd like to then recognize you, have you come over to the microphone so that I can keep some order here, and then we can vote on the issue. If there is a motion to call the question, or if anyone has got any further to say, please raise your hand. However, I had down here first to hear from Mr. Underhill, who had his hand up. You're okay, Mr. Underhill? Okay, then in the back, someone, was it Mr. Dampier that had his hand up? Okay, well, Mr. Dampier, would you call a question, is that correct? Is there a second to Mr. Dampier's motion to call the question? Okay. To cease debate requires 2/3 vote. It's not debatable. So I would ask that all of you who wish to cease debate, please rise and remain standing. Continue rising. Now you can continue to descend. All those that are opposed to ceasing debate, please rise. And it appears that we do have the 2/3 vote. We do, in fact, have the 2/3 vote to cease debate, and debate is ceased on the pending question, which is the amendment to increase the budget by $75,000. Therefore, we'll take a vote on that. All those in favor of increasing the budget by $75,000, please rise and remain standing. And rise more. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. You may be seated. The noes have it, and the amendment, Mr. Maloney's amendment to increase the budget by $75,000 is defeated. Point of order, would you please come over to the mic so I can hear you? And once again, Mrs. Baboulas raised a good point. I really would appreciate it if everyone who addresses the body state their name. Mr. Maloney, if you would do that, Mr.
Kevin Maloney, District 3. I'd like to request a roll call.
Usually what we do is if there is a question in anybody's mind, you have the right to request a division of the House, which would be an actual counting of the votes.
It's not a question. You know, it was clear that the amendment lost, but this is probably the biggest issue facing this town.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor, I'm going to call on a little advice from you, but a roll call, I believe, requires, or Mr. Okay, great, Mr. Fisher, roll call requires a certain number of votes, right?
That's right. By our addendum B of our charter, a roll call vote shall be had upon demand of 6 or more town meeting members.
Okay. So Mr. Maloney has requested a roll call. Is there 5 additional members who want to join with Mr. Maloney in requesting a roll call on this issue? I'm going to call on Mr. Phillips.
I have a point of order. Steve Phillips, District
Yes, Steve.
3. It seems that would be in order to request prior to the declaration that the motion had passed, but not afterwards.
Mr. Phillips is technically correct. I believe that once we give you an opportunity to request either a division or in extraordinary cases a roll call, but I do agree with Mr. Phillips's position and point of order that once the decision has been declared by the chair, the matter cannot be reconsidered. Would you agree with that, Mr. Fisher?
I would, Mr. Moderator. I think with regard to the request for a division or a roll call is usually made when there is some doubt by the chair as to the actual vote by the numbers standing in favor and in opposition. So that is your ruling. If the proper motion would be a motion to reconsider if indeed you want to go that route.
I don't believe that we can reconsider in town meeting a vote that is my understanding. In town meeting, you can't reconsider a vote that has already been conclusively decided by the body. It has to remain for a subsequent town meeting. I believe that Mr. Phillips is correct, Mr. Maloney, that once it is declared, it is too late to then call for a roll call. I will attempt to be a little bit more slower in declaring the outcome of the vote, but this one seemed to me to be overwhelming, and I understand where you're coming from, but
we're elected officials, and we have, the
Right.
public has the right to know how each of us vote on important issues, which is why I was requesting it. But I'll be quicker if I want it in the future.
Yeah, and don't forget that we do stand, and this is on television, and people that are here have the ability to look and see who is standing in favor of your motion to amend and who is standing against it. So it is sort of a short-circuit way of doing it, and had it been close at all, I certainly would have, at the very least, suggested a division. Okay? Again, we return to the reoccurring question, which is the budget itself. Is there further debate? Dr. Fagelson.
Bob Fagelson, District 1, I move the question.
Dr. Fagelson has moved to cease debate on the principal motion. Again, it requires a 2/3 vote. We will start by asking all who are in favor of stopping debate on the main motion to please rise. You may be seated. All those who are opposed to stopping debate, please rise. You may be seated. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have voted to cease debate. So we now go to the reoccurring question, which is, shall the Select Board be authorized to raise, appropriate, and expend the sum not to exceed $14,408,264 in order to defray, to the extent all general fund expenses for the period of July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013, including all highway and Windham County taxes, and the Select Board be authorized to expend, in addition, any sum authorized for special purposes under any article contained in the warning for this or any other special meeting, and interest at a rate of 1% per month be charged from the due date of payment on any overdue payment of the town tax, installment, or portion thereof, and that the town taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1, 2012 shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments, payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then to the collector of taxes, and that such payment of the installments shall be made on or before 5 p.m. on August 15, 2012, and November 15, 2012, and November 15, 2013, and May 15, 2013. All those in favor, please signify by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed signify by rising. And you have adopted and approved Article 9. Article 10, to see if the town will authorize its Select Board to borrow on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenue. The Chair recognizes Ms. Barboulis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the Select Board be authorized to borrow money on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenue.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, are you ready for the question? Shall the town authorize its select board to borrow money on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenues? All those in favor, please indicate by rising. Riding. Now I got you riding. You may be seated. All those opposed, please indicate by rising. And you have approved Article 10. Moving now to Article 11, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $78,000 through special assessments on properties within the Downtown Improvement District as approved by town meeting March 19, 2005, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization. The chair recognizes Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $78,000 through special assessments on properties within the Downtown Improvement District as approved by town meeting March 19, 2005, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization.
Is there a second? Discussion. Does anyone wish to be heard on the motion? If not, Dr. Tortolani.
Bob Tortolani, District 2. As a point of information, those properties that were damaged in either the flood or the fire, has there been any forgiveness for this year regarding the amount that they were to pay, or is it just the same? Thank you.
The administration has interrogated Mr. DeGray.
Any of the properties, actually anybody can abate can apply for an abatement for their taxes. Several properties were given exemptions by the abatement board after Hurricane Irene, and the issue with DID money, it's like town school money. The money is guaranteed. And so the reality is that whatever those properties were abated and what they were paying into the DID will have to be addressed at a later issue. But they will still, they're still guaranteed their money, and actually the money for this year is one of the issues in questions, because when the abatement, when they apply for the abatement, it affects the current year that we're in. And so there will be a shortage in actually what everybody's assessment is, and that'll have to be addressed at a later point.
Further discussion? The motion is, shall the town raise and appropriate the sum of $78,000 through special assessments on property within the Downtown Improvement District, as approved by town meeting March 19, 2005, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Acts to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, and to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown district. All those in favor, please indicate by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed, please indicate by rising. And you have overwhelmingly approved Article 11. We now turn to Article 12, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $223,276.47 through special assessments on property within the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Tax District, as approved by the town meeting March 24, 2007, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to establish and regulate the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Tax District for the purpose of paying debt service on the capital improvements to the water and sewer lines serving the Mountain Home and Deepwood mobile home parks. Dr. Schneck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $223,276.47 through special assessments on property within the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Tax District, as approved by the town meeting March 24, 2007, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to establish and regulate the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Tax District for the purpose of paying debt service on the capital improvements to the water and sewer lines serving the Mountain Home and Deepwood mobile home parks.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please rise and... Yes. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. No. Okay. The yeses clearly have it, and the article number 12 has been approved and adopted by this body. We now move to Article 13, to see if the town will vote to appropriate up to $170,000 from the unassigned fund balance to defray the town's portion of costs associated with the repairs due to Tropical Storm Irene. The chair recognizes Mr. Gartenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town appropriate a sum not to exceed $170,000 from the unassigned fund balance to defray the town's portion of costs associated with repairs due to Tropical Storm Irene. And if I could speak briefly to the motion.
You may.
Thank you. Over the course of the months since Tropical Storm Irene, we have spent...
I'm sorry, I'm going to just stop you just for 1 second, Mr. Gartenstein. Is there a second to the motion?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, sir. We've spent already about $1,116,000 for the costs of local projects for storm damage repair, and we are estimating at this time about $1,750,000 worth of projects. The estimated local share at this time is about $129,000, although if we get down to a 5% local contribution, obviously the cost would be less. We do anticipate additional costs at this time for the Cook Road Bridge and some other projects. We hope that the total local share will be less than $170,000, and we are requesting authority at this time to expend up to $170,000 local money for the Tropical Storm Irene repairs.
Is there further discussion? Dr. Fagelson.
Yeah, just a point of information. How much money is currently in the unassigned fund?
The chair would recognize the town manager.
It's a bit over $1 million, and we're fortunate to have that because thus far we have had over about $1 million worth of work done with Tropical Storm Irene, and we have received about $150,000 in reimbursement thus far.
So you've already expended money from that fund?
We're using our cash flow at this point, and if that money is not approved, we would have to use operating funds. At this point, we would then have to have a special town meeting to see for additional funds.
Thank you.
The other thing, there have been some changes by GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board. They changed some of the designations of our fund balance. It used to be that after 3 years, if you reserved money after 3 years, if it wasn't used, it would just become unreserved. That's no longer the case. So we will be back. Any monies that we do not expend of this $170,000, we will be back next year at the town meeting to ask you to undesignate that money. And I say that just so you know, you will have an accounting of how this money has been used.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Barber.
Orion Barber, District 1. This is just a point of information. I'm looking at page 97, statement of revenues and so forth, and fund balances. In the first column it says general fund balance June 30, 2011, $1,671,867. Is that the fund balance that you're talking about from which the 170 will come?
That's a total fund balance that includes not just unreserved funding, which is what we're talking about. That larger number includes funding that or fund balance for monies that are actually reserved for projects, and there is detail on that in the audit notes. John, do you know?
Yes. So where is the unreserved from?
Page 94.
94.
If you look at 94, you see the total, you see fund balance, and you see non-spendable, committed, undesignated, or unassigned, I'm sorry. Unassigned is where we're coming from.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good catch, though. That was a good question. Thank you.
Other discussion or questions? The question is, shall the town appropriate up to $170,000 from the unassigned fund balances to defray the town's portion of costs associated with repair due to Tropical Storm Irene? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor, please rise. You may be seated. All opposed, please rise. And you have adopted Article 13. Article 14, to see if the town will vote to exempt American Legion Little League Field from its municipal portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 12 Oak Grove Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012, for 2011, assessed value $99,040. The municipal portion of the tax, $1,106. The education portion of the tax, $1,394. The chair would recognize Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town exempt American Legion Little League Field from its municipal portion of taxes on its land and building at 12 Oak Grove Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
Is there a second? Then you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Last time we discussed this was in 1996. I was out there with you, and I stood up and I opposed this motion. Not for any other reason that I don't support Little League Baseball in the American Legion, but I was concerned about access to the field, and that the American Legion and or the organizers of the Little League field don't allow that field to be used prior to or after Little League season. I've always felt that it's a beautiful baseball field, and there's actually no other place to play baseball, and that that field should be allowed for baseball to be played throughout the course of the year. And I have spoken to Mr. Costello, who is actually, I'm going to ask the moderator to recognize, who is going to speak to this from the American Legion, and I've spoke to him about my concern about accessibility to people other than Little Leaguers. So I've stated that I'm going to support this, and hopefully the access to that field will change after he has a conversation with people at the Little League organization and or American Legion. Thank you.
At the request of Mr. DeGray, the chair would recognize Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Little League field over the hill here was owned by the town until 1952. It was used for many purposes, and for 2 years was privately owned. In 1954, the American Legion purchased it. In 1955, it's been used by the Little League continuously since that time. In 2006, the State Department of Taxes looked at the exemption, which was granted at that time by this body, and concluded that the field was entitled to a general exemption. So there would be no taxes assessed on that property. And that was the situation from 2006 through last year. Last fall, the Tax Department of the state looked again at the issue and concluded that the exemption, which had existed before, would not be automatic, but rather would be decreed if this body agreed to allow it. So for the last 5 years, there's been no tax paid based on a determination by the Tax Department that was concurred in by the administration that the property be exempt. So we're back here today in order to ask this body to grant an exemption for the municipal purposes only. And if this motion passes, the Legion will find a way to pay the educational part of it, which will be increased from past years. Dick Guthrie is the commander of the Legion. He is present here and can speak to the motion and to the merits and particularities of it. The field is a great asset for our town. There's absolutely no expense for the town in maintaining it, and it's contributed greatly to the welfare of our community. We ask that the motion pass.
Mr. Guthrie, do you wish to be heard?
Thank you, Dick Guthrie, Commander of Post 5. My other life, for years, I was the town safety officer and the juvenile officer for the Brattleboro Police Department. In keeping statistics on juvenile offenses for many years, I noted year after year that in the summer months that the juvenile crime rate decreased. And I allotted that to the fact that the town recreation department did a tremendous job, and also the volunteers that ran Little League, Babe Ruth, Small Fry, and so forth. I hope that is continuing in this community. In regards to the comments made by Mr. DeGray, we're like an absentee tenant. We have no one from the American Legion that sits there every day to watch that field. Because I live in the neighborhood, I'm probably the closest member of the American Legion to that field. And because I have the expertise about checking doors and properties in the community, that is one piece of property that I check on a daily routine. Just 2 weeks ago, when they had a day off from school, I went by and observed 12, 13 teenagers playing on the field, littering the field with plastic bottles, and illegally smoking in the dugout. This past summer, 4 days in a row, we had vandalism to the concession stand that was just done over by the Masari boy 3 years ago, who, for his Eagle Scout project, raised $25,000 to renew that concession stand. And it was tremendously vandalized 4 days in a row. On the fourth day, I found a buck knife 3 feet from the door that somebody tried to break into that stand. Yes, Mr. DeGray, it would be nice if we could use that field, but we'd have to have constant supervision. And I don't see that happening right now. We're also been a neighborhood refuge for leaves, brush, and so forth. I stopped one lady from dumping her spring cleanup last Sunday afternoon, and she says, well, they're trying to fill in this hole. Well, that's contrary to what I know as commander of the Legion. So I have ordered signs from the McCarthy Sign Company, and he's graciously donated some of the cost of those signs to be erected shortly for no dumping. It's too bad we have to put them up in my neighborhood. But I'm hoping this Cow Power dumpster over here by the high school will be used more for our neighborhood than it's being used now at the Little League field. So I don't see right away that our field can be used other than for Little League. And that's what it was intended for. And if we do pay the educational taxes, we will be paying taxes on our baseball field, and other fields used for baseball and recreation are tax exempt wholly. I also like to say that many years ago, I believe it was Darryl Sawyer, the late Darryl Sawyer, asked the Little League if they could use that field because of the fact that the baseball fields around Memorial Park were not ready to be used in the spring, so they use them for spring training of their girls softball team at the BUHS. Thank you. Anybody has any questions, try to answer them.
Let's see, I see some hands over here. Let me catch someone in the front. Yes, go ahead.
Sarah Edwards, District 3. I love baseball. My husband and I take a crank radio out and go outside somewhere so that we can hear it in the old-fashioned way. We're great followers. My question is the Little League open to all town children regardless of ability?
I believe so. Right now, we have a Little League Association that runs the program. Mm-hmm. There's 96 children, boys and girls, that were involved in Little League last year. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're trying to attract more teams. Mm-hmm. And from what I hear, they may try to attract teams from Putney to come down and play, to be additional teams.
While I, as I said, love baseball, I'm not sure that I can vote for this because I can support things that are open to all children regardless of ability. And since this selects for just some children, I'm not sure I'm going to vote for this. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to vote for it. But I don't want that to diminish my support. I just don't know if it should come from public funds.
I think Little League has been part of many programs in this community that initiated teaching boys and girls the rules and regulations of baseball, also team approach, good sportsmanship in the community. I think we've graduated a lot of boys and girls from Little League into the high school ball and then into college ball. And I think I haven't heard of anybody being professional, such like Ernie Johnson, but coming from Little League in Brattleboro. But I think we've probably, the American Legion also supports many other programs, such as Babe Ruth, Small Fry, girls soccer, hockey team, and other sporting events throughout the state. We have a Legion baseball that, believe it or not, cost the American Legion Post number 5 close to $10,000 last year to run that program.
I think it's an invaluable program, and it teaches lots of different skills, and my point is not to diminish the importance of the program. It's simply a matter of public funds versus private. So thank you.
The question then is, shall the town exempt the American Legion Little League field from the municipal portion of taxes on its land and buildings at 12 Oak Grove Avenue, Brattleboro, for a period of 4 years from April 1 of 2012? The chair recognizes Mr. Underhill.
Ben Underhill, District 2. While I'm not currently affiliated with Little League, I think, Sarah, I can answer your question because I work a lot with them with Small Fry. Little League is, anybody who is in the district is allowed to try out for Little League. The way it works now is if the child is league age 10 years old and they don't, or less, and they don't make it, they're welcome to come back to Small Fry baseball. I know over the last 5-6 years, they've worked very hard at taking all the 11 and 12-year-olds who do try out. But I will also say I wouldn't be surprised if there maybe had been 1 or 2 who did not make it due to severe safety issues. But it really is all-inclusive. They've worked very, very hard over the last few years to allow anybody who wants to play a chance to play.
The gentleman in the white shirt.
A.D. Everett, District 1. I think it would be penny wise and pound foolish to not do this because it's helped a lot of kids for a long time. And if you tax the Legion out of owning this property, you got 1.5 building lots, which is not going to do a great deal for the tax roll. And the Legion is willing to pay the educational portion without contest. And so I would have to strongly urge you to vote to support this.
Dr. Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Peter Abel, District 1. With regard to tryouts for Little League, I have to relate the experience that my own young son went through back in '89 or '90. He came and tried out for Little League, did his best, but one of the kids who was supposed to drive to the tryouts, the son of his own elementary school teacher, said, "Nah, I'm not going to go to the tryouts." Well, as it turned out, the teacher's son was put on a team, and my own son was not. And he was crushed. It brings tears to my eyes to remember how he sobbed in the kitchen when he realized really what the lesson that he learned was not whether you did your best at the tryouts, but who you knew. The teams were already formed before the tryouts. So I called the guy who was in charge at the Legion, and I let him know how I felt, and it still bothers me. Thank you.
There was someone who had their hand up. Yes, sir, over on this side. I can't see you, but check shirt. There you go. Thank you.
I am Siegel, District 3. I was so moved by what Peter Abel said that I've forgotten what I was going to say, but hopefully it'll come back to me quickly. I think, speaking to Mr. DeGray's concern and Mr. Guthrie's concerns about vandalism, I'm no expert in juvenile criminal behavior, but common sense would tell me that if that field were in more use it would probably be less vandalized. So I think the argument that to not allow other uses of the field is in fact works against the concerns that Mr. Guthrie had, and therefore I would vote against this without any further reassurances from the Legion.
The gentleman in the back. Yes, sir.
My name is Bob Beatty. I'm from District 1. I don't think we should be trying how perfect the Little League is. I went through a Little League. It wasn't perfect, but that's not the point here. The American Legion has maintained these fields for just about my whole life, and I'm almost 60. So some lawyer decided to relook at how the decision to give it nonprofit status is decided. So be it. But I don't think this body should really be scrutinizing what they've done. I think that they've, by and large, done a really good job. They've been maintaining it on a shoestring. It's clearly a charitable endeavor that they've been facilitating for at least a half a century. I also don't think that we should use this as leverage to try to force them to increase their usage. I mean, if we're going to do that, we should also, besides not making them pay taxes, give them money to allow them to take care of the field. So I think we're really going way overboard here. Thank you.
Mr. Wilberding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. I rise in favor of the motion, and I would like to say briefly why. For a number of years, I've been concerned about ways in which tax burden indirectly or directly affect the missions of nonprofit organizations. One of the things that we've begun to look at in the Finance Committee, and which we look forward to looking at in the coming year, is the manner in which payments in lieu of taxes are assessed, and also the manner in which the system now works for organizations that have charitable missions. I'm aware of one case, for instance, where an organization whose landlord is a church is passed on. It's a charitable organization, but the tax burden of their landlord is passed on to them, and they have to pay it. I believe that we should attempt to standardize on behalf of our local charitable organizations and in the interests of the town seeking other sources of revenue, begin to standardize the manner in which payments in lieu of taxes are calculated, and explicitly to tax only things that are not charitable in intent. Obviously, if I give money to a charitable organization, I want to know that money's not going to be taxed, because it's already been taxed before I give it charitably. I think that we should vote in favor of this particular motion, but I also think we need a different system for deciding which charitable organizations in the town receive exemptions to their taxes, local taxes, because I think that we need to guarantee that their missions are successful in the interest of the town.
Dr. Fagelson.
No, I'm not going to. Bob Fagelson, District 1. I come not to praise nor bury the Legion. I've had my problems with the Little League and the Legion. I was a coach of an '82 team my son was on that won the state tournament, but also suffered another son of mine who was waiting for the phone call to find out if he was on the team or not, which never came. Be that as it may, I think one of the things we all have to consider here, and it's I appreciate the fact that the Legion has offered to pay the education tax, but every one of these articles, this one and the next several articles, you will see they have the town's portion of the tax and the school's section of the tax. Well, guess who has to pay both? The town. The school does not have to. School does not get exempted. We have to pay the school's exemption. So just bear that in mind when you're voting these exemptions.
This exemption, however, is only from the municipal portion of the tax. You understand that? Yeah. Mr. Rounds,
I just have a question, and I hope somebody can answer for me. The only thing I'm wondering is, we look at this as the Legion, and I don't know if it's on our tax rate, but at one time it was voucher 40 and 8 as part of the Legion. And do we have to have that also in this to make it clear that that's who's being exempt? Because I think they were the ones at one time owned and ran the Little League field. I know it's gone that way since.
Can Mr. Costello or Mr. Guthrie answer the question?
48 was an entity that acquired title back in '54, but the Legion owns it, and that's the proper party to get the exemption.
Further discussion? Mr. Phillips.
Steve Phillips, District 3. I'm going to support this motion, and I wanted to point out that Little League really does substantially open itself as much as possible to kids of all ability. Not everyone gets a chance, and there are injustices, as we've heard on occasion. I'd like to think that the good that they do far outweighs any negatives. And I do point out that at the college level and at the school level, public funds are used for competitive positions. And so this is harsh because this is a young age to have to face that reality. But it is a reality that needs to be faced eventually. You don't get to be on the Brattleboro varsity boys team because you want to, regardless of ability.
You're not talking about 11-year-olds there.
Nope, and that's why I said it's harsh. It's a harsh thing to face that reality at this age, but it is a reality that is coming for these kids, so I point that out.
Mr. Chapman?
I want to be able to speak. I think members of the public should speak first. I did want to be able to speak before somebody moves to shut off debate.
Well, you've been recognized. Please do so.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I want to speak to this issue in the spirit of making something positive come out of this discussion. What I'm hearing here is a request by an organization that maintains a popular program, that maintains a central open space, and whose organization itself is venerable. And in sponsoring the activities, it is maintaining a relationship between generations, although it's rather indirect. I think that it's a very, very important situation that we have here in the town's benefit. The tough part is, of course, the matter of exempting taxation, and I agree with Mr. DeGray that we have a space that is not utilized as much as it could be. And for that reason, I would like to query Mr. Guthrie and ask if this body were to approve this exemption, would the American Legion work with the town to come up with a way to see that this space could be utilized by more than just the brief season of Little League? I think Mr. DeGray's point is excellent, that we are asking taxpayers to subsidize a space that is underutilized. And I think that is a material concern. I would love to see us succeed here. And my question is, what would it take to succeed so that we could all feel good about that we're making the right decision in exempting the property from municipal taxes, and in such a way that it wouldn't burden the American Legion?
Mr. Guthrie is interrogated.
Dick Guthrie, Commander, Post 5, American Legion. Number one, like I said, we're like an absentee tenant, owner, and we need supervision. Our cost of liability would probably increase, insurance-wise, and that does not come out of public funds. And maintenance of the property would probably be increasing, and that would not come out of public funds. You know, when we use the high school field over here for our American Legion baseball, we have to pay a stipend there. So we're not exempt from paying either. And I do say that the school has decreased our stipend because we are a nonprofit and trying to use the field for public recreation, which we have to do. But, you know, it's probably one of the best kept fields for Little League in the state of Vermont. And after the acts of vandalism here this past summer, I was devastated because I know that Mr. Salaries spent a lot of time 3 years ago making that a beautiful concession stand. And he raised $25,000 to do so. The Little League Association has raised approximately $9,000, and if you go by there today, you'll see some construction for safety measures, a new retaining wall. And that's been done. No public funds are being used for that. That's donations made to the Little League Association. So it's hard for us to open that up as a recreation center. And we'd like to keep it the way it is for purposes that it's been kept for the last 50 years.
Does that respond to your question, Mr. Chapman?
Well, that is an answer. It doesn't answer exactly the question I asked. The question I asked was, what would it take to succeed here in getting you your exemption that we all feel would be appropriate, and to satisfy the concern that we would be, if we maintain the status quo, Dick.
Well, as commander of the Legion, I only have one vote, and I have 700 members of my organization. And so I couldn't make that commitment to the town at this time. Well, I'm not authorized to do so.
I'm not asking you to make a commitment today. I'm asking what kind of process that you might be willing to commit to and ask your membership to get involved in order to come to a very satisfactory conclusion that satisfies both interests. Let me just say, I want you to have that exemption. I am going to vote for it. I don't know as everybody else here is, but I wonder if there was some way to see our way through the woods here in a process that starts today, not ends today, that we could get something really satisfactory.
Well, I think, you know, to get that opened up for public use year-round, you know, I might find it hard for my membership to come to a conclusion, probably in relationship to the skateboard park at the Crow Lot. That dilemma you're going through right now as town officials. And, you know, there's a lot of concern by members of the community on that issue. So I think probably justifully, we'd probably have the same issues brought up by our membership.
Anything further, Mr. Chapman?
I guess I should just ask the question another way. What is it that the American Legion would be willing to do to work with the community to make some kind of situation work? What kind of process? I mean, are you saying to me today, here, right now, the answer is no? Or are you willing to open up a dialogue that would be part of a process?
I can bring that question back to my membership.
There's a point of order. Would you stand and please?
Sherry Manning,
yes,
District
stand.
1.
Yes, Ms. Manning.
Sorry to address you personally, Chris, but I think that this, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but this motion alone is to vote on whether we're going to really exempt the municipal taxes. And the reason that it came up this year is because the state of Vermont went through and looked at a number of properties. So I believe it's out of order, isn't it, to bring in this whole other discussion about opening it up for the whole year? It seems that it might be confounding it rather than assisting it, possibly. So is that a point that you can address?
Your point is well taken. The motion is, in fact, whether to exempt the municipal portion of the taxes. There are, of course, some flexibility and freedom to discuss about the general situation concerning the use of the field, but I think we ought to try to stick as much as we can right to the motion that is on the floor. Let's see, I think I had a hand over here from Mr. Webster that I was going to acknowledge. It'll come to you, Doctor.
I think your clarification helps. The question facing us, do we want to spend $1,100 and whatever it is dollars of tax money to support this particular program? I think it's that simple. I have a lot of concerns about equity and how teams are chosen. I don't think 11 to 12 is the developmental age where you make those cuts for the first time, but that's not an issue for us here. And I wish we had the whole department run by the rec department, but that costs money. So I think let's just focus on this question, and I'd call the question.
Point of order. Point of order.
Somebody's raising a point of order. If you are, please stand now at the microphone. You cannot call the question after having made a speech. So if anyone wants to call the question, you're going to have to do so. It's a non-debatable issue. There was another point of order. If you need to make a point of order, please go to the microphone. I am cognizant of the fact that it's 20 minutes to 1. We get through this particular article and we will break for lunch. Do we have a point of order that wasn't just covered? Okay, then I'm going to call upon Dr. Copens.
Stuart Copans, District 3, and I'd like to make an amendment actually to this motion. The motion is to approve it, I believe, for 4 years, and what I'd like to do is amend the motion so that we grant the money for 2 years and come back in 2 years and look at whether some dialogue has actually begun between the American Legion and either the town recreation board or the town itself around a way to make the field available for structured activities during other times in the year.
Is there a second to Dr. Copens' motion?
Point of order.
All right, we have Dr. Fagelson with a point of order. Go ahead.
Didn't we just decide that we weren't going to discuss this? This was all about whether they're going to be exempt or not, and all the rest of this stuff is peripheral. You want to have a discussion with them, vote this up or down, and then have the discussion. This is not the time or place to have that discussion.
Where we are right now is we do have a motion that has been made and seconded, which effectively would reduce the exemption from 4 to 2 years. That's the effect of the motion. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an appropriate motion. Is a motion to amend. Is there any discussion on Dr. Copens' motion to amend to reduce the exemption effectively to 2 years? Here, Ms. Edwards.
Point of order. Was there a second, sir?
Yes, there was.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If we vote that this is acceptable, I would be in support of the motion and will be voting for the article.
Okay. So the question before the body at this point is the Copan's motion to amend. Are you ready for that vote? Please. Please stand up at the microphone. And your name again?
Caleb Clark, District 2. I'm just a little confused. I keep hearing people say municipal, but it says educational portions on the article.
No.
So
It is only the municipal portion.
Okay.
The article itself lays out the entire amount, but the only amount that was moved to be exempt is the municipal portion of the taxes.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilmerding. Sure.
John Wilmerding, District 3. This may seem like a semantical point, but we are not voting to pay money, and we are not voting to grant money. We are voting to grant an exemption to taxation in recognition of a charitable mission. There's a difference.
Are you ready for the vote on the amendment? If so, all those in favor of the amendment reducing the exemption period from 4 years to 2 years, please signify by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed to reducing the period of exemption from 4 to 2 years, rise, and you may be seated. The ayes appear to have it. Yes. There's been a request for a division, which I think is what you're looking for. All right, then we will move to a division, and I will ask the clerks to count the votes. All those in favor of the amendment reducing the period of exemption from 4 years to 2 years, please rise and remain standing while your vote is being counted. Did you count? Yeah, I'm going to do that. How much? Okay. You may be seated. All those opposed to the amendment, please rise and remain standing until your vote is counted. You may be seated. Here are the results of your vote. 63 in favor of the motion to amend and 60 opposed. So the motion to amend is adopted, and we return to the reoccurring motion that is on the table, and that is, shall the town exempt the American Legion Little League field from the municipal portion of taxes on its land and buildings at 12 Oak Grove Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 2 years from April 1st, 2012. The gentleman over here to the far left. The question has been called, which requires a two-thirds vote. All those in favor of ceasing debate, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed to ceasing debate, please rise. You may be seated. And debate, more than two-thirds has been achieved. The debate will cease. We then return to the question, shall the town exempt the American Legion Little League field from its municipal portion of taxes on its land and building at 12 Oak Grove Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 2 years from April 1st, 2012. All those in favor, please indicate by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed, please stand. You may be seated. And the article has been adopted as amended by Dr. Kopacz. At this point, it is almost 1 o'clock. I didn't expect that this particular article would go this long. So we will adjourn for 1 hour. Can we make it back here by 1:45? Is that reasonable? Let's call it 1:45. We will re-adjourn.
Talk about your boyfriends, kissing girlfriends too. The prairie dogs don't mean anything. You talk about old lovers, all those men who fell for you. The prairie dogs don't mean anything. Anything. Remember how your mama said don't mention other boys. Remember how your daddy told you, let's go make some noise. I said, glory, hallelujah, Mary had a little lamb. Prairie dogs don't mean anything. It seems to me that someday you'll be glad of who I am. 'Cause prairie dogs don't mean